Good afternoon. I call the special meeting for the Ames City Council for Friday, 28th of January to order. Starting working on our budget review and only one item on our agenda, and that's going over the budget to start with. So turn over to Dwayne and Steve.
Yep. Well, thank you. We appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to unveil my recommended budget for fiscal year 2022-23 to the City Council and to the public. This budget represents about $280 million worth of expenditures for the coming fiscal year, but it's divided out within the numerous funds or businesses operations that we administer. So we're going to try to stay at the 20,000 foot level today to show you kind of the big picture regards to property tax and any utility fee increases that were contained in this particular document. I do want to start off with the public and you just to give you some of the issues we face, some good news and bad news as we began to prepare the budget, which will take effect July 1st, of July 1st of 2022. I got to remember, 22. We have three challenges that we face as we began preparing the budget. One, we've talked about the state legislature, and they were able to backfill, if you will, revenue we lost when they passed a piece of legislation which rolled back the assessed valuation on industrial and commercial property. By doing that, we lost a substantial amount of potential revenue for our property taxes, okay? So they promised cities throughout the state that they would backfill that. Remember, for the city of Ames, it was approximately $900,000, a little more than $900,000 that was backfilled in each of our four levies. Well, I guess not surprisingly to us, more recently than last year, the legislature said they were going to do away with that backfill because they had to make cuts in their own budgets. The only good part about their decision was they're going to drain that backfill from us over a 5-year period. So we'll lose 20% of the money each year. Gives us time to adjust. But in terms of the budget, it means in next fiscal year a loss of about $168,000. And of that $168,000, $99,000 can be associated with the general fund, which affects property taxes. So when you lose that revenue, that backfill revenue, in terms of taxes, that $99,000 has been reduced. We're going to have to raise taxes or find a way to cut expenditures to offset that loss in revenue of $99,000. Also, we talk about rollback, the state mandated rollback that's given to us. That's the amount or percentage that an individual's property is assessed, valued for taxes, for taxation. And when we found out the state mandated rollback will actually go from about 56% down to 54%. So less money is subject to taxes, right, than was the year before. That move lost us about $84 million of assessed value that prior to that, we could apply your tax rate and generate money for. So we're going to lose that off of our tax rolls. Challenging for us to make up. And last but not least, we've talked about our new swimming pool indoor aquatic center. If you recall, right now we're thinking about it's a $31 million project. Hopefully we're going to get $10 million of donations. So we're going to have to issue $21 million, about approximately $21 million in general obligation debt. Now, in looking through the cash flow needs of that, what we're going to do is probably we're going to have issued over 2 years. The first time you'll see that debt, it's going to be about $6 million. And that will be in next year's budget. It's about $6,200,000 in 22-23. And in 23-24, we'll have to issue the remaining portion, which is almost $14 million. Now, we always talk about this and we try to project what it's going to cost. Remember, you asked, what's the swimming pool going to cost for operations and capital? We give you the answer. But I think people sometimes forget that's in isolation. What really happens is we have our ongoing budget needs for operations and capital. In terms of general obligation bonds, we issue approximately $12 to $13 million alone for streets, our storm sewers. So when you layer that swimming pool on top, the combination is going to result in a very substantial increase in the debt service portion of your property tax. So you'll see when Dwayne goes over this, my budget recommends, or we need about $1.2 million more for next year, incrementally more, to finance the operations of the city through the general fund operations. And what we're going to have to do is, when we layer those two debts on top of each other, specifically this year, more specifically the year after, it's going to have a big effect on the budget. In this coming year, you'll see that of that $1.2 million, over half of that is coming from debt service because of that first initial issuance of those bonds for the swimming pool, plus the ongoing commitment to streets. So that is a challenge for us, right? We're trying to soften that. I know everybody said we want it, but we try to work here to try to mitigate that increase as much as possible. And we'll have a way to do that for you, you'll see. So those are some of the challenges. Now, not everything is gloom and doom. We've had some good news, too, that affects our budget. We have a state-mandated police and fire retirement system. It's actuarial studies are performed, and then we're contacted and told as a city how much we'll have to contribute to that system. The good thing is that we've been notified for fiscal year 22-23. Actually, we'll be required to contribute $169,000 less than the current year. That's good news, right? Also, we found some good news is in the local option sales tax. I think you'll see when Nancy goes over the funds that we're realizing a substantial savings in the current, we're exceeding our projected budget amounts in the current year by about $2.3 million. So we were very conservative when we put this budget together last year. At this time for the current year, we weren't sure what the impact of the pandemic would have on people's shopping habits. What we're finding is people maybe are returning faster than we thought in-house shopping, but certainly internet sales have skyrocketed to keep up. So that's a pleasant surprise. And because it's been seemingly restoring itself and maybe coming up higher than before, we have budgeted, remember we were going to budget another 10% growth on that for next year, meaning 2022-23. That's another $892,000. So that's good news. That's additional revenue over the current year budget built in the base. And the final good bit of news has to do with we generate a substantial amount of savings in the general fund from vacancies. Now, it's not good news when we lose people. A lot of people retired. Some people left the professions they were in. In other positions, we just held open for a period of time until we felt more comfortable about the impact of the pandemic would have on all of us. And because of that, we saved about $800,000 in savings in the general fund from salaries. When you put those all together, the good bit of news is that actually we're projecting one-time savings in the general fund about $3.6 million over what we had projected. Now, as in the past, we've had these kind of balances before, and I always encourage the city council, and I want them to remember that these are one-time savings, and in spending them, I hope you would use it for one-time expenditures. You could try to reduce property taxes and include this revenue for ongoing expenses, but you're going to be in real trouble the year after that when the balance is gone. We will lay out for you tonight our recommendation for utilizing those funds, which was a pleasant surprise for us. You'll see that we're going to use the funds for fire safety, parks and recreation, library, the cemetery, our IT, and some of our facilities, all one-time expenditures. What makes it even more positive is many of these expenditures would have to have been in the budget itself, or in future budgets, we'd have to finance with property taxes, additional property taxes. Now we have this extra revenue to pay cash for it. So in the long run, we're saving our citizens money too. The big chunk of money from that $3.6 million of savings, I have recommended and put in the budget in these areas. First of all, I'm recommending you establish a $200,000 pool for sustainability projects. There's going to be a gap between the time we receive the recommendations from our sustainability consultants, the time we then take to implement to establish our implementation plan, and then maybe some low-hanging fruit we want to move on immediately. So I've got a pool of money in there for that in the interim. Secondly, we're going to talk about the parking fund again. I talked to you about last year. That's the one fund I have concerns about. Don't like to run a negative balance in any fund. Last year, we infused $600,000 from general fund savings to that fund to help cover operating costs and build up a balance for some capital improvements to start repairing our parking lots. Well, you're going to see that we've actually had to draw down that fund about $200,000 over 2 years. So the pandemic had an impact the early part of that, but it's continuing too in terms of our revenue for our parking fund. So I'm recommending $500,000 of that savings be moved into the parking fund. You'll see that. To help mitigate the impact of compounding the indoor swimming pool debt, indoor aquatics debt, along with our normal allotment of geo bonds, I'm suggesting, and I have included in this budget, $900,000 to be placed in the debt service fund. We can use that as a balance and Dwayne will show you over a 5-year period to help mitigate the increase that's caused by this big jump by the infusion of that $21 million geo bond debt. So we'll be able to mitigate, not reduce, but mitigate the increase to our taxpayers. And finally, last year for the first time, we established a fund for the city council. We call it the city council's priority fund. If you remember, we put $1 million in it last year. We chose to use that fund, those monies, for this year, for the plaza. When the plaza, as we developed the plaza and it came in substantially higher than we had budgeted, you dedicated those funds for that. I'm restoring $1 million into that fund. And the nice thing about that is sometimes council gets frustrated. We just complete our priority goal setting, and then you always say, Steve, you've already set the budget for next year. We don't have any money to accomplish anything. So now I've got a pool of money for you to deal with your priorities too. So I think that all in all, it's pretty positive. If you will, then we're going to go into talking about property taxes first. Then we'll talk about the other utilities and all the funds. So Dwayne, you want to start off? We'll go into property taxes.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Just a quick little bit of information about the process. We have some documents posted out on the web. There's the capital improvement plan, which was placed out there prior to our first hearing with the council, and of course was there last week when we had the public hearing. The budget document is now posted out there, and that will be discussed, of course, next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, as we go through the details. Today, we'll be primarily going through a document called the Special Reports for the 22-23 budget. We have a PowerPoint that's associated with that summarizes a lot of the documents because they're fairly large. We won't be able people to see these if they're watching at home. But we also have this document loaded up, so if there's any item you want to discuss, we'll pull away from the PowerPoint and pull that document up.
Twain, can you just share where they could find that on the website? Just under where?
Page on the City of Ames page, right up at the top. We have everything that's new up there, and then I think generally Susan will then make a link out through the splash page or the landing page for the City of Ames also.
So those interested could just go to the finance under the finance department, and then it should be there.
They're
at the
easy to
top.
find under finance.
Thank you.
So this year's theme is Parks and Recreation. You can see some of our facilities there. Again, as we talk about property tax, we always like to remind people at home that the city makes up about a third of the property tax bill, the largest portion being the school. And this graph here is based on Ames City and Ames School District. If you're in Ames and you're part of that growing Gilbert School District, will be a slightly smaller portion of your total levy. Some just big picture overall. Property tax rate is down 4 cents from last year, 21-22. Taxable and assessed value is up for all major property classes. As Steve mentioned, we had decreases in the replacement tax from the state and an increase in the debt service levy due to the Aquatic Center, but those were substantially mitigated by that increase in local option tax and some very modest increase in operating expenses by our department heads. We have a balanced general fund budget for operations and capital, so money in, money out for the general fund will balance. And we have utility rate increases for wastewater, stormwater, and the resource recovery tipping fee. So we've got a page in your packet that if we flip on to page 4, I skipped by a couple things. One was the detail of the levy, and then I will bring to your attention just kind of where the City of Ames stands as far as other levies.
That's page 3, right?
Page 3. We're at 987 right now, so that puts us at the lowest of all the larger cities. And there's some other measures in there, such as per capita valuation, but that'll give you an idea where we stand in comparison with the other cities. One levy area they do want to point out is the general levy, and we're at 555, and that is well under the 810 limit. If you look at this group of larger cities in Iowa, there's only one other that is not at the maximum levy limit of $8.10. So that provides the council the flexibility to look at services every year and possibly add things or make some adjustments. So total levy for the upcoming year, we've got page 4, which we show a lot of detail on this levy rate, but bottom line, as we mentioned, is down 4 cents. That's driven by an increase in expenses of a little over $1.1 million. And as Steve mentioned, a little over half of that was due to the increase in the debt service levy, driven primarily by the Aquatic Center. General levy is down slightly to $5.51. That brings in $17 million. That was influenced by the increase in the local option sales tax. Employee benefits levy is also down. Transit levy is down 1 penny, so a very small decrease. So the only levy that was increased for the year was the debt service levy. That was up about 7.5 cents, and that obviously was offset by the decreases in the other levies, bringing us down by 4 cents for the year. So that's about a 0.5% change in the rate, which generates about 3.65 percent in additional dollars. And we do also show on that page the reduction due to the 20% change in the replacement tax. I would point out that you don't see a 20% reduction in debt service. That's because part of that replacement tax goes towards TIF debt, which is up above.
By the way, you can interrupt us as we go. Hope this is a workshop setting kind of thing.
This slide just provides all the detail on that. This shows the trend in our tax levy for the last several years, and it had hovered around $10 and was up to $10.14, and then as valuations have gone up a bit, or especially stabilized. We'll show you the last couple of years, we've kept the rate very close at 987 and 983. And those color codes show the different levies, which have also remained pretty stable over the last few years. This slide shows the impact of the valuation or the local option sales tax on the property tax rate. And if you can remember a few years back, we had not been capturing, we believe, all of the sales in the area. I mean, we had seen that the rate of change did not even keep up with inflation and our change in population. But we think with the change in internet sales, that impact of local option is capturing all the retail sales here. And if you just look at this chart, the green is the reduction in the property tax rate based on local option sales tax. So if we did not have local option sales tax, it would be $1.73 higher. So that 60% of each dollar goes directly to reduced property taxes. If you look back a few years, it was $1.59 here in 1920.
Brian, you have a question?
Yeah, so if the state changes the method that we do this with, it sounds like that's on the table, right? That they do away with local option and replace it with a 1% state?
Yeah. What Brown is referring to is the state legislature is looking at essentially across the state going to a 1 cent sales tax. And based on a call I was on this morning, the legislature has communicated that what we are currently collecting should not change at all. So I made it very apparent that we relied on it for property tax, and also, as you're all aware, helps us fund our asset and, human service agencies, services, and community betterment. So it is a very hot issue, and I have 2 phone calls on Monday with both Metro Coalition and Iowa League of City Legislative Policy Committee. And so there's more. We're sending a very strong message that please continue that, because as we can see, almost $1.75, is going to help with property tax reduction. But yes, thank you for bringing that up. And it's something that we are concerned about right now. We've been told, nothing should change.
Do you get the sense that they would give us as much money as we got? Like if they're saying you won't get any less money, would they measure what we got in the prior year and give that, or would they figure what we would have gotten if our 2 cent local were still in place?
Okay, so the 1 cent save money that goes to the schools, that is going to stay unchanged.
Sure.
And the legislature is indicating that all the tax that's collected for things that are purchased in Story County and Ames will still be repaid 100%. Now, if sales goes down, then we would get less.
Sure.
If sales goes up, and they're maintaining that with a statewide 7%. Now, I wasn't even aware of this, but there are still some places in Iowa that don't have 7%. They're at 6%. It'll make it easier for them to enforce with the internet sales vendors. No, we're at 7% across everywhere. You got to make sure you pay for it, because there are some examples of internet sales companies not charging or collecting the full amount. So the maintaining is, we might even see a little bit more, going in. So
Okay.
anyway, so your concern is very much warranted.
Something
And I'm
to
trying to-
follow for sure, yeah.
And trying to, and keeping the council abreast, and Dwayne and Steve, on what information I do get. But we are monitoring. And if there's any indication that would change, there'll be an all-out
Yeah.
campaign to make it known that this is something that would really harm our taxpayers. And
Both you do great things with this revenue, the council does. You reduce property taxes there. You see that how it's been used to provide property tax relief. That's for the 60%. 40% goes to community betterment, and there's a lot of positive impact from public art to human service agencies. A lot of good things we do, even with improvements in the parks and library. So it's something we want to keep an eye out on, because in the past we've been told, don't worry, it's going to be this way, and sometimes it evolves differently. So it's an important source of revenue for the cities, and especially the city of Ames. So we have to do everything we can to guard this, and I hope everybody supports us in that effort if it's ever needed. Right now, the state legislators say, don't worry. But it's our job to always worry.
And someone asked, well, what's driving it? They're trying to find a mechanism by which to fund the I-Will, the water quality that we all voted on years ago about the 3/8 of 1 cent. They have figured out how they can pay or get revenue to provide that without dipping into the 1 cent sales tax that goes to the cities or counties. So all I can say is stay tuned. And in my last 4 years, I've learned until it's passed, it's subject to change. So we're going to be monitoring it very carefully. But it's an excellent point, Brian, and it's one that
Yeah, great point.
it's whenever you start hearing that, you wonder, are they going to tweak it?
Yeah.
So Steve,
Yes, ma'am.
hypothetically,
Yep.
let's assume that the legislature does what they're planning right now, and we lose that local option sales tax, and whatever mechanism the state has that supposedly doesn't reduce our income, actually does reduce our income. Is that where we bring in that cushion in the levy that we can still use up to 810? Or,
Yes, you have the ability to raise taxes up to 810 from the $5 we talked about. But that would shift, obviously, property taxes would go up, and
yeah,
that's the beauty of the local option sales tax is services are used by people, especially in a town like ours, where we draw people in from all over, that some of the visitors help pay for it through their, some of the dealings they have in town commercially. So they help pay for it because they put stress on our streets, our police, our fire, those type of things. So it's a good source of revenue for cities like us, who are a regional center. But what we'll do is we shift the burden to the citizens. Fortunately, we have the ability to raise taxes, although you never want to raise taxes. You hope that doesn't happen.
That's a really good point, Gloria, too, because as we move forward, if this does get adopted, council needs to be aware that we probably should have a $2 cushion above our, or keep it at 610 or less if we can, or there's some other mechanisms you probably could explore. But
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
there's a lot of moving parts here right now, and so we just want to be really mindful of that as we go forward. But thankfully, we're in really good shape because of the efforts on the department heads and the city manager.
so a related question, Steve,
Yes.
although shifting away from hypotheticals.
Okay.
We are moving into our climate action plan, and I'm assuming we're going to have some pretty big expenditures. How much of those expenditures will be dependent on raising property taxes, and how much on other sorts of revenue that city takes in?
Good question. I'll have to see when we get the recommendations, and then there will be different options. You'll have to pick some. I think they'll all be costly, but you want to pick the one that gets you, it's the most effective in reducing the, our carbon footprint. So there'll be some to pick from, and that will depend what strategy we use. If it requires a 100 megawatt solar farm, that will come out of electric rates. We'll issue probably revenue bonds, because we'll need a chunk of money up front. We'll have to borrow money and be paid through our electric rate customers. So not everything will be property tax. We'll have to decide what project it is, so I know what we can use, the source of funding we can use. So that's why I'm interested to see what the different options are, which ones you pick, and maybe that'll affect which one you pick. Not only where you get the best bang for your buck in terms of carbon reduction, but also, whose pocket it's coming out of, what's easier to pay for. So it'll be very intriguing for us to figure out a strategy. That's why this implementation plan I keep talking about, it's going to take a little while after the consultant just hands it to you, because then we have to figure out a financing strategy, implementation strategy, just from the workload, all those kind of things. Good question. Now, there is no limit on your revenue bonds, you know what I'm saying? But you are limited by the amount people have out of their pocket to pay for all the different utilities. Because you will probably have impact on a lot of the areas, including property taxes, the different utilities. It's going to compound. So our job is to try to level it if we can. If we can mitigate it. It's going to go up. You just hope it doesn't go up like this, right? We're going to try to mitigate. So it'll be interesting. It'll be a fun exercise for us to figure that out.
And next slide just provides a graphic of how our valuation has changed over the last several years. And you can see it's been up and down. It's influenced by a lot of things. Rollback had a fairly significant influence this year. Also revaluation, and it varies each year. Kind of good news is it's been pretty stable last 2 years at up 4.7%. The prior year and up 4.4 this year. And with value, and this is taxable value, up greater than our increase in expenses, that means our rate goes down. And that's what we're seeing here this year with a 4% or a 4 cent decrease in our rate. I think this is also a fairly good news slide. This provides the detail of all the classes of property, residential, and I combine commercial and multi-residential because that was a class that started as commercial and was moving to multi-res and will eventually or quite soon be to residential. And then also industrial and the utilities. And that's not our utilities. These are utilities that are valued by the state. So each class of these properties, if you look way over at the right, they're all up some amount in percentage value and all up in taxable value. So especially given everything that's gone on in the last couple of years. And again, these are values as of January 1st, 2021. So, after I'd say kind of the first part of the pandemic where there could have been some impact. We're still positive here in Ames, and we're up 4.4%. We'll break that down a little bit. You can see there's some classes up more than others, and residential, for example, up 5.75% assessed, but only 1.47 in taxable, and we'll go over why that's the case. This is just a graphic looking at our valuation. This is over the last several years. We talked about percentage changes over the years. That has a lot of things impacting it. But if you look at the gold bars here, our assessed value has marched up pretty steadily each year over the past 10 years. And the taxable value, which is subject to the rollback, has not been quite as steady, but over time has moved up somewhat proportionally to the assessed value. So this slide, we break out those change in improvements or change in taxable value. So we've talked about we're up 4.4% or 4.39. And if we look at the change in taxable value across the taxes of across the classes of property, residential's up a little over $30 million, commercial up 99.6, industrial 12, and utilities a small amount, 380,000. So we'll just go across in a couple of these classes here. So residential was up $30 million in taxable value. We had almost that amount just in new improvements. We had some transfers in class. That puts us up to almost 40 million. We had a change in valuation of $70 million. So we're well over that 30 that we were up. And then we had some expiring exemptions that increased the value by about $2 million. But then we get over here at the adjustment to rollback. So, these are just individual properties that may have gone up or new properties that come on. But the rollback change impacts the entire class of the property. So that going down a little over 2% reduces the taxable value that wipes out more than the amount of the increase in valuation, and actually would cover quite a bit of these. So that wipes out all these positive numbers and brings us to the taxable change. There's still a positive, about $30 million. But this column I want to point out, we look at how much do the existing property values change, or the taxable value on existing property taxpayers. So if you look at new improvements, they're new. Transfers in class, they're new to the class. So we're really looking at what happened in change in valuation and what happened to rollback. So for the class of property that paid taxes last year, they're actually down. And we'll see how that impacts the tax payments later on. So there's a reduction in taxable value on existing property owners by a little over $13 million. Commercial class.
I have a question,
Yes.
Dwayne. I apologize, I should know this by now, but on the column, change due new property improvements, could you explain what that means?
That is
What's
new,
happening?
new construction, and then any substantial rehab that would be picked up as new in the revaluation by the assessor. This is part of the abstract that they provide, and then we go through and pull these out and come up with the reason for the changes in value.
And so can you delineate between new construction and then the rehabs? Because what we're seeing is that our new constructions are fairly modest.
Yes.
So then there's only one other place then. So people aren't building new houses, they're rehabbing and improving their existing houses, and that's causing the increased valuation. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, and I honestly, I think it depends on what type of permits they take out. This is outside of my area, but if someone would just update their kitchen, for example, and that could add a fair amount of value without ever taking a permit out, that would not get picked up in a new improvement. But eventually, as the assessor comes around, that would be a revaluation. If somebody adds on to their home, they're going to need a permit, and it's going to get revalued. Then I believe that would go in new improvements. So I think all the the people staying home and going to Lowe's, and nicely improving their properties. I think a lot of that's probably showing up in the revalue. But
It just strikes me as a big number. I don't remember seeing $30 million or anything close to this. So I don't know why this catches my attention this year, but that's a
Well,
That's a
it
lot
does
of
include
kitchens.
apartments also, because they're in the residential class when they're as set as condos. So actually, when you look back, this is a fairly low number.
okay. Yep. All right. Thank you.
Commercial class, where the rollback stayed the same. Now, we did have some rollback in multi-res, but they're up $99 million. We had 35.6 in new improvements. There's a negative amount in transfers in class, and that's obviously movement between residential and commercial. We had an increase in value of $64.2 million. We had new and expiring exemptions of $26 million, and the rollback, and that's all the multi-res, of about $11 million. So where the residential class went down on the existing property owners, the commercial and residential combined actually went up $53 million, and primarily driven by the increase in valuation and a more fixed rollback. Most of the property in there stayed at 90%. Industrial is a important but much smaller class. It's a fair amount of value, but not that many properties. We did have some new improvements in here, some increased valuations, and some new exemptions. And so all of the new value gets attributed to the existing property owners. So that's up about 4.9 million. So utilities, again, that's set by the state. So that's all just new value. And then we have some smaller numbers here with military exemptions going down, which actually adds to it. There's less of a reduction, I'll put it that way. So of this increase of $142 million, 45 would be on the existing property owners, but not evenly spread out. And then all these items in between are what make up that 142. So lots of ins and outs to end up with 142 million, or 4.4% in increased valuation.
We were fairly lucky, as you can see. Look how much money was taken away from the rollback going down. So we were lucky to have new improvements, and then had a healthy valuation increase on existing properties.
I'm going to jump here. My slides are a little bit out of order, but if you remember back on our tax levy page, we had a couple areas where we traditionally use some fund balance, and this year debt service we're not. But I'll go over that in just a minute. But in the police and fire trust, and that it was the second levy down, way back in June 30th, 1992, we closed out a prior police and fire pension system, and each participant in that system had an actuarial study done, and if they were short, they had to come up with the money somehow. If they were over, that was kept and had a limited number of uses, one of which was to mitigate the city's contributions in future years. And apparently we took that one pretty seriously, because we've been doing that since 1992, and I think pretty successfully, but we're running down to the end of our time here. You may ask, why are we using $90,000 this year to reduce that rate? Well, the reason is we look forward, and that pension system, it was amortizing an unfunded liability. And just like when you amortize your house, once you get later in that amortization, you start paying it down pretty quickly. And with that should come a reduced contributions rate to the cities. The cities are the variable portion of the contribution to this pension system. So the expectation is that over here on the right is the city's rate of contribution into this pension system. It's dropped from 26.18, that's what reduced our expense, down to 23.19. And assuming the other actuarial assumptions come to pass, we're going to see that rate drop down each of the next few years. So we're going to use the money now while it's at 23.9. We'll use a little bit less next year, a little bit less, quite a bit less the following year, and then out into, that should be 25, 26. We'll use the last of that money, and then we expect the rate to be at 17%. And that's the floor for that pension system. So we think that's going to work out well. Now next thing we'll talk about is debt service. So this year, as we mentioned, that makes up about half of our increase in property taxes. And a lot of that is driven by, if we look over here, this is you would have seen these numbers in our CIP. We'll have a bond issue coming up of about a little over $18.3 million. And approximately a third of that's for the Aquatic Center. So, you would typically see $10 to $12 million, but now with this extra $6 million, we'll be issuing $18 million. So that bumps up our debt service. And we break this down over here just so you can see both on current, well, not on current, but on existing projects, where that debt service is going to. So we issued a little bit for airport improvements. And if you look at this column, debt service abatements, that's part of an agreement with Iowa State, depending on how the FBO does. So that is either abated by revenue at the FBO or by Iowa State. So there's no property tax support for that debt. Fire apparatus, that's one that's subject to our agreement with Iowa State. So 25% of that gets paid by Iowa State, so there's the property tax support for fire apparatus. Fire facilities, occasionally we issue small amounts for improvements to fire facilities. That's a little bit of property tax support there. If you remember a couple of years ago, this is kind of an interesting story. We issued bonds to establish our own radio system. A part of that was paid by our utilities, and also some pretty heavy users are the public safety. So we have property tax support for that debt service that comes out of taxes of about $223,000 or about 0.06%. But you'll see when we review the operating budget, we've substantially reduced our cost for that service. And my understanding is that it's a lot of improvements in what we get in radio service. City Hall improvements, we've done some small issues in the past to do some improvements at City Hall. Water projects are all abated. So those are general obligation bonds. Sewer projects the same. Resource recovery, urban renewal, no impact on property tax. Storm sewer, we'll talk about the storm sewer fee, but some of the larger projects are paid by bonds. So again, these are past bonds. But the biggest one, the big one, streets are paid for. Streets and bridges. So that's where the bulk of the money goes. Here's our reduction in state replacement tax, and that comes down to your debt service levy. Now,
Any questions on that?
Steve had mentioned the use of fund balance. So we do have a fairly substantial fund balance in the debt service fund, which is increased by the recommended budget by $900,000. So we have the debt service levy increasing from $2.99 or almost $3 to $3.07. So you may ask, why don't we use some of that balance right now? Well, next year we're going to be issuing $25.9 million in GO bonds, and that includes a little over 13 or right around 13 for the rec center or the aquatic center. So that's going to be a pretty substantial bump in debt service to pay for that. So what we have planned out is to use quite a bit of fund balance that year so that our increase in the levy rate, assuming a 3%, which would be a pretty modest growth in value, would be about 10 cents. The following year, we have the CIP in there at $13.4 million. So again, some debt. If you look up that top line, we have debt falling off. We have debt coming on. We'd use $850,000. And again, the rate would go up by about 10 cents. Out in the next year, and now we're hoping, there may be some good news, some increases in value. Sometimes we end up with some extra funds available, but about a 15-cent increase out here in 25, 26. Now that's about the time frame, if the reinvestment district is done, that you'd start to see some of that revenue. So we could possibly mitigate some of that increase. Then out in 25, 26, we'd use $350,000, and there's again another about 11-cent increase. But if you had some reinvestment district money, and this assumes none, these two larger increases out here in the fourth and fifth year could be mitigated. Now, if you go out even farther, which we do, but we don't present that one here. I mean, the plan gets a little bit tougher, but at the end of 2032, we pay off the Ames Public Library improvement. So that you'll have a substantial drop off in that year, and we're already kind of including that in our planning. So, I think it's okay to spend this fund balance now, and you're going to have out in your further horizon some debt falling off. And we think, with some judicial use of debt and some long-term planning, we can keep this rate fairly stable, even with the addition of a large project such as Aquatic Center. We've also layered in, though not here because it's not in the CIP, but as we've looked out farther, Steve's talked to me about a fire station, moving a fire station, a possible animal control center, a new one. None of those are in here, but that doesn't mean we're not planning for those and how they'd fit into your debt service levy.
What year does the library fall off again?
At the end of 2032.
2032. Thank you.
So already baked into here, we've done some refis, and that being the longer debt, that had a pretty substantial impact on library, and we'll see that in just a minute. But the entire debt will fall off then.
2032. Thanks.
We already talked about police and fire fund balance. Now we'll talk about dollar value of the levy. We talked a few minutes ago about how valuation changes, and now we'll talk about how the levy is allocated. So if you look back or you think back to that page when we talked about the total levy, all of the property taxes together is this $33,592,919. We had that change of about $1.1 million or 3.65%. So residential, out of that 33 million, they're our biggest class of property, and now we're talking about total taxes here. They'll pay about $20.7 million. So they're up $207,000 total across the class, or about 1.01%. And that takes all the ins and outs. Commercial property, a little over 11 million out of the total property tax bill. They're up 933,786, or about 9%. Industrial, 1.5, up 115, or 8.3. Utilities, 134, just up a slight amount. TIF for debt service only, that's down, but that's not necessarily bad news. That only means that TIF has been released to general taxation. So that would be some of that increase up here in commercial. So here's the total levy of 33,545. We've got military exemption. So that just kind of gives you an idea of who's paying the taxes or what classes of property are paying the taxes. Now we break out similar to value. If you look back to that slide, we talk about the different changes and how, what caused that change. So residential went up 207, 327 as a class. New property alone would have been more than that. The change in revaluation on existing property would have been more also. But then we had the rollback that wipes essentially all that out. So change on existing property. So existing property owners will actually pay a little bit less in taxes this year than they did last year. And we're talking about as a class. Commercial and industrial, or commercial multi-residential, a little bit different story because they don't have the big change in rollback. So there is actually new dollars in the positive on existing property owners. And we'll talk about the rates and averages here in a minute. A similar story on industrial and utilities. We won't spend a lot of time on those. So here's just charting out values by type of property. Residential is the largest class. So here's taxable value at 65% and 63%. And if you look across different cities, they vary quite a bit. But for a larger city, we are a pretty heavy residential city. They make up 62% of the taxable value. So any change in rollback will heavily influence the taxes, not only on that class, but on the other classes. Residential makes up almost 72% of the assessed value. For commercial, that was 29% back in 1920, up to 31%, 31.44 and 21.22, and then they're up again in 22-23, and they make up about a little less than a fourth of the total assessed value. Industrial, again, a fairly small class for Ames, and you can see where they are a little over 4% of the taxable, about 4.5%, but only 3% of the assessed value. So one area that we like to talk about is, there's a lot of discussion on, what were the dollars, how did we change in value, but how does that impact the bill to the various property owners? And so we take the information that we had discussed on these other slides, and we apply the average revaluation across the different classes of property. Then we apply the rollback, and then we look at how does that impact a property owner that would move by the average of the class. So our tax rate went down 4 cents, as we had talked about. If you're a residential property owner and your value went up by the average of the class, which was a little over 3%, you're rolled back by 2%, and then our rate went down. So the combination of all those things, you would have gone from paying $556.97 to $550.16, or a reduction of about $6.81. So what that means is most of our residential owners are going to see a slight decrease in their property taxes based on this budget. Now, the increase is not applied evenly across classes, and that's due to the rollback. So if you look at commercial property, they on average were up a little over 6%. They get the rollback is fixed. They do get the advantage of the slight reduction in the rate. So they would be up $51.63 or $5.81. And if you look back over the years, essentially for the last 5 years or so, when the rollback goes down, or the value of residential property is rolled back, their tax goes down and the commercial goes up. When it runs the other way, when rollback goes up on residential, the amount of taxes they pay goes up and the commercial and industrial tends to go down. So we've seen that pattern, and this is the year when it's down for residential and up for commercial.
So Dwayne, I have a question here. So we have the Eastern Industrial Area, Prairie View, that we're hoping to see develop over time. And my hope is that over time, East Lincoln Way will eventually see some redevelopment. As we are able to bring in additional industrial and commercial properties onto our tax rolls, what effect does that have on the burden that residential property taxpayers are paying?
Well, two things. One, obviously, if there's not a lot of costs that they're carrying for infrastructure, for example, that would reduce their share. But if you have a larger amount of commercial and industrial property, so if we're not as residential heavy, that would mean any change in the rollback would not have as much impact across all classes of property, because you're not moving such a big number, 2% or so either way. So it would really help even things out, not just to the residential, but to the commercial, the existing commercial and industrial also.
It's good for us at this kind of setting to think about as we see long-term the development of that Prairie View area and hopefully some additional commercial area in town, what the benefits would be for all of the property owners. So thanks for your thoughts on that.
Yep. In this next slide, we just take a look at, for $100,000 in value and the change in the rate and rollback, what does this impact the different properties? And part of the reason we use this is you'll see this $532 again in just a minute. But this is the amount of taxes that $100,000 of value would pay to the city, going from 556 down to 532. In a minute, we'll show where does that 532 go. So down about $24, and that's really due to the rollback and the rate. For the other classes of property with a fixed rollback, the reduction in the rate, or the reduction in the dollars, is going to match exactly the rate, or 0.45%.
Is there always a rollback adjustment?
Yes. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 30 years now, and it's never been a year that I'm aware of that I've been doing this where there hasn't been a rollback adjustment. Steve's been doing it even longer. So
Same thing, yeah. It goes up or down, though. It's just one direction.
Interesting.
yeah, the way the formula's set, there almost has to be one
I
every
see.
year.
Okay, I'm just curious.
So where does that $532 go? Well, this is a graphic. So on the average, or any home, that per 100,000 in value, and if you have a $200,000 home, you can double that or triple it or whatever you need to do. The biggest piece is debt service. So if you look at an individual part of the levy to one single area, and the bulk of that goes to streets and traffic. So $145 goes to that. Now, if you want to just look at an area of service as public safety, and you look at police and fire, we miss some.
Yeah.
You're missing it.
Yeah,
in mine.
looks like there's some headings missing. So trust me, that purple one is police. The blue one is fire. So those two together are 206. Next one down is the library, and that will have reduced a little bit from last year, and that's because we refied some debt. So debt's included in here. Transit's down to $32, and that's our contribution to that system. This line is Parks and Recreation, and that is bumped up a little bit, and that's because it includes some debt. General support services, $28. This is planning at $9, resource recovery at $6. There's animal control at $5, facilities at $3, stormwater at $2, and building safety at $1. So that's where the 532 goes. We've got it listed out later in the packet if you're interested in that.
Wayne, before we move on, so under fire protection, how do we think about this with respect to Iowa State's contribution to our fire?
That reduces it, obviously. So
So the true cost of what we provide in fire services would be, so they pay, what is it,
a
fourth?
fourth.
And so it almost might be sort of interesting to see that chart just to show what the true level of service is, just reflecting the fact that this is sort of the one unique line item where they're contributing substantially to that provision of services.
Transit too.
Yeah, transit's complicated because there you also have a substantial federal, but you're right. We provide that service, but we're not paying the freight of that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think the greater detail of that will be seen when you go over their individual budget, because we do show the different sources of funding on each of those services. Jump to utilities. Steve talks about trying to not stack the different utilities on top of each other in any given year. This year, we have more than one, but it's split out a little bit. And one's not a substantial dollar amount, even though it shows as 5%. But for 22-23, we have a 5% increase in the sewer rate, of just slightly over 5% in storm sewer if you take it out several places, but that's 25 cents per ERU. And resource recovery, that's in the tipping fee, going up from, I believe, $58.75 to $62. So that's up about 6.4%. That is the fee the hauler pays when they dump at the resource recovery plant. So there's two primary sources of revenue for that. One is the per capita subsidy that's paid through property taxes, and then we have the increase in the rate. Then if you look out, and these are planned changes over the next several years, and I think, generally, I don't recall that these have ever gone up. I think John Dunn's pretty conservative when he looks out forward on his rates. Electric, I'll point that one out. No increase this year, and we have none planned in the 5-year CIP. But that's an area where we're looking at a waste to energy study, possible things related to climate change that could change that. But right now, as it sits, we have no increase planned in that utility.
Same thing with the resource recovery plan. It doesn't assume our next phase of the plan, which will have a substantial debt involved in it. So it's status quo for those two until we find out which option the council picks, and then we can cost it out.
So John Dunn will do a rate workshop with you when he goes through the actual ordinance to increase the rates, and we usually do that in the March timeframe after we get through the budget. But we like to show that increase in the couple rates. How does that impact a bill? Because when you just look at one piece of it, I think customers are generally looking at what's going to happen to my entire bill that we pay. So I've got a couple samples here. John will go over quite a bit more, but this is the median use residential customer, and that would come out to about 600 kilowatts of electricity and 600 cubic feet of water, which is also billed the same way for sewer. So if you look at their total bill right now, it would be about $146.19 if that's the services they get. Their stormwater bill would go up 5%, and that's 25 cents because each residential is one ERU. Sewer's up 5%, that would be $1.77. So when someone looks at their bill, if they're a median use customer, it's going to be up about $1.38. I will point out right now the electric ECA, and that's energy cost adjustment, is negative. That's been negative for a while. We're not sure when that could change, but that does float with their bill. So any amount that might change would impact that number. But as we sit now, it would be up 1.38%. We look at median use, commercial, large power. These customers, like a lot of commercial customers, the total bill is very heavily influenced by the, this needs to get updated, by the electric bill. So that's no change in electric bill. In fact, they have the negative in ECA. We have them in as 3 ERUs. So depending on the property, that could change. Their sewer bill would be up $22.78. But again, since they're so heavily influenced by electric, the impact on the total bill is 0.34%.
Something doesn't seem right on that.
Pardon me?
Well, it shows on the previous slide.
Yeah, the
600 kilowatt.
that did not get updated across the slides. They should be, I don't.
A lot more
Yeah,
kWh.
Yeah,
Or gas is really, really, really expensive.
yeah.
John, I'm impressed that you caught that. Well done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no kidding.
I'm really impressed.
Wow.
That's the curse of being a numbers guy.
Still, it's good.
Now, remember, with the agreement with Xenia, in the future, next couple of years, we're going to have residential development or development within the city of Ames, but not necessarily under our water utility. So we're going to be talking about water utility rates. We're only going to be talking about our rates, not other rates. If they're within other districts, right?
So included in the packet, we also have the recommended use of the Arpa funding. And I think we discussed that with the capital improvement plan because that's where most of those expenditures are. But we just laid that out one more time. That's a fairly new item. There's changes in FTEs, both current and going back in history. And you'll see not only where those are placed, but also, why they're there. What's the impact on the service? I don't know, Steve, do you want to talk about FTEs at all, or wait on that for the departments using them, or?
Go over now, wait until the departments bring it up. The FTEs, you want to wait until the departments, they're highlighted.
Sure.
Wait.
Might as well.
Can you go back on the, we did get an email from someone asking about how our ARPA fund use is compared to the county that came in just this morning. I know that there's more leeway that the county has for use of ARPA funds. Is that not correct?
I can't speak.
Yeah, I've had enough trouble keeping up with what the city's supposed to do.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at.
But
the
in
count.
general, just highlight with the, we're limited to water and sewer, underground water and sewer. And there's one other category.
Strategy here was to use, water and sewer is one of the areas that's emphasized for cities. Our strategy was to use these funds to help provide infrastructure in the 4 areas that you want to grow according to your 2040 plan. Because in the past, we've actually established a plan, walked away, and people couldn't develop. It was too costly to extend water and sewer lines where there's gaps. We have a lot of gaps between areas. So you may not agree with it, but that was my strategy. So, and when we get those areas infrastructure too, then we will start having some development. With that development, it will spread the burden of property taxes that we know are going to come and other utility costs. So it helps us jumpstart the development of the plan. We won't sit there and say we got a great plan. We have no way to finance getting the infrastructure. So you can use the money probably in other ways, but that's my thought process. And then the other areas, I think I've told you back then about, we had to use it for the plaza again, and we're going to use it for one-time costs on the air conditioner, which everybody likes, in the auditorium. We're reserving about $850,000 for the indoor aquatic center, hopefully to make some sustainability improvements that have never been designed or never included in the initial estimate cost for that project. That $31 million, I don't believe has things like geothermal built into it or a solar roof. I don't know if we can even do it, but I have money to tell our engineer to start putting those. And what's the other? I think that's what page is that on? And also, the ice arena. That was one fund that was not necessarily hurt too badly, but we want to build that ice arena up. We're not sure of coming out of the pandemic, if we'll have some of our major renters, being Iowa State is a major renter, is going to rent as much ice time. I'm trying to build up a balance there in case they drop off. We'll have a sufficient balance to get us through a year or two to make corrections. So I can't tell you what the requirements are for the county. There are probably other ways to use this money. This is what I believe is a good use of the money.
Steve, can I ask about the logic? We've gotten some complaints over the years about the fact that we are willing to extend our infrastructure, but claims are that we're somewhat slow or not as thorough on maintenance of current infrastructure. So we're investing in new things while upgrading the old things takes longer.
Never heard that complaint. In fact, most of the points I get is when we're upgrading the infrastructure, we're doing streets and reconstruction. People are very impatient with closing the streets. So I think we get really kudos for people who lived in other cities, how our street system, our water system is maintained. So I haven't heard that. I'll show the capital investment we make in our capital improvements plan. So have we got?
Oh, I know we're investing a lot, but I have heard those things in my 8 years on council coming up. So my question is, we have a lot of expansion here regarding the 2040 plan infrastructure, but we also have some other infrastructure that is in need of maintenance or replacement that we have built in over the very long term. And what comes to mind is the question of the water main upsizing. That's in the front of my mind simply because it's in the packet here. So what is the logic in investing in the expansion here rather than completing a project like that long-term replacement of water mains that already exist?
Well, we try to do both. That's the pressure we're under. As you grow, you've decided to grow. We're trying to take care of that need at the same time, balance the finite amount of money or politically acceptable amount of money you can raise from our customers to maintain our systems too. So we try to do both. There's a balance. Now, remember, could be another big federal allotment coming down, right? With the Build Back America one. We haven't even factored that in there. So that may give us more flexibility than we had in the Arpa funds to deal with some of those things. But it's a balance. It's a balance.
I don't know, in my mind, it just seems like the 2040 plan is a much further out kind of development
Well, I don't know.
rather than those
We hear from our
things that are
developers,
closer to home already.
there's no room for housing, any more housing.
We don't have lots.
We don't have lots. We need that. We heard going east on East Lincoln Way with our industrial, we had to increase our industrial allotment. So I think we were at the fringe, and that's why you did it. It's not something, it's a need that's out there 20 years. There's a more immediate need. That's why you're making the investment. But all these are balances. Everything you do is a balance. Maintaining, growing new. Why are we building a new swimming pool? Or why are we building a agility course? We don't need that right now. We should be putting it into our existing apparatus. You could argue that all the time. It's the balance that we always try to do.
One of the challenges is pushing our property rates or property values up is that people don't have any place to build houses. And so if we're concerned about affordable housing, at some point we have to create additional inventory. Otherwise, it's going to continue to push people from out. They won't be able to live in Ames.
Yeah, it's a good thing when we look at it, step back, and we say, boy, our valuations on our housing has gone up, right? That shows you could see cities that are in trouble. You'll see their property values drop. But to the property owner, they don't want to bear the burden of our increased budget requirements because they've been reassessed higher. So how do you soften that? Your goal should go out and grow new people. That new category, people who never paid taxes before, you want to add to that. So we're lucky that our valuations are growing. I don't like to see our growth. The 4.4%, if that was all just reevaluations, that puts the burden on all of us to pay for it, right? It's good to bring in that new growth. That's the balance we have again. But you don't want to ignore, you don't want to ignore your neighborhoods. That's why we invest a substantial amount, you'll see, in water lines and sewer lines and streets in our existing neighborhoods too. We're not going to let those neighborhoods suffer.
Well, it just seems odd to me that we've got the 2.7 million for the extension of the sanitary sewer on East 13th, or 13th East across the highway. And I thought that area was going to be our last option for growth areas, but now we're expanding the trail to go out that way.
No.
So it just feels like
No,
that one was way out in our discussions of the
So
2040
that's opening
plan.
up our commercial area out there.
Yeah, this isn't the residential piece.
That's a
so
commercials piece.
The,
And we
one of the
haven't
things that's
committed
been
to expanding
challenging,
that trail.
What's that?
We haven't committed to expanding the trail either.
No, but we've been talking about that.
so one of the big challenges of being able to attract industries to the eastern industrial areas, they haven't seen that we've got the utilities out provided. So this is a major step forward in being able to see the eastern industrial area develop.
I think you're focusing on, maybe it was a wording in our CIP, but it's not that sometimes we can't spend all the money you have. You got to get the contractor.
Yeah.
It's taking time. So you can give me $5 million. I'll go to John. Is John still sitting back there watching?
Yep, he's there.
And John will tell you, you give me all the money you can. I don't have the contractors to do it all. So don't think it's just the money. And we're dedicated to that. In fact, other things we're thinking about, if we get that Build Back America, we're thinking about accelerating, getting into lead, the lead for service lines. Remember, it's not city's responsibility to deal with service lines, but maybe we can leverage the federal funds for something like that too. So we're thinking about all that, but I think we may have overstated the issue in that one page, that we're falling behind. It's not like if you gave us more money, we could keep up with it. But you're raising a good point. The first point you made, I think it's legitimate. And I'm just trying to tell you, the world to us is balance. You don't want to attract all new people and throw all your money in the new subdivisions, right? We got to maintain the existing housing stock, the existing neighborhoods. And it's a balance. We try to do it all. No, that's a good enough answer for you, but it got me excited.
I'm all for balance, Steve. I just thought that area out east was not the primary growth area,
It's
and
not.
that we were
Let
leaving
me
it.
say it
so
again.
this
You're talking
seems
about
early.
13th Street, not the East Lincoln Way. That's to open up that commercial area. Anytime you have valuable commercial property sitting on an interstate highway, that will bring in, that will generate a lot of tax revenue, which will help mitigate the burden on everyone else. And we've got a sewer line that has been out there. We've been trying to wait to TIF it to get advantage of one company coming in. We can TIF on it. We haven't had that. So I think it's time. You're going to open up that area. You put that investment in that sewer line. The water is already over there. You're going to open up a substantial area of land, which will generate taxes for us. Which again, I think we're going to need when we build all those other geo bonds we're going to be looking at, and we're going to be working on our sustainability plan. I think we want to spread that burden among a larger, growing population than the same number.
One of the things I think it's helpful to remind ourselves at a conversation like this, if you look at a map of Ames, so much of our property we can't tax.
Yeah,
It's just
almost
off the
50%.
rolls. Ames is an unusual city.
Yeah.
And so the rest of the property owners bear all the burden. So to the degree we can have some other, the industrial and additional commercial assist with this, it really would help to rebalance things, in my opinion.
Yeah, we're not exactly balanced. If you
No, right.
As Dwayne said, we're overly reliant. Now, some cities are just suburbs, and that's all they have residential. I've worked in
Right.
places like that. It was almost 100%, believe it or not, residential suburbs of St. Louis, but those are difficult to maintain financially.
So can you remind me, I think you said 60% is residential, and then what is our breakout for commercial and industrial right now?
On the taxable basis, I'll flip back to that sign. It's a little over 60% residential, 62.1. And commercial and multi-res is 33%. Now that portion that's multi-res, which I think is like 200 some million, that's going to move to residential. So residential is going to go up even more. And industrial is only 4.51.
4.51. Okay, thank you. I knew you had said it, I just couldn't remember where it was.
But thinking of $100,000 of assessed valuation, right, on a industrial property, they're gonna pay taxes on 90,000 of that.
Right.
That same 100,000, if you put it in a house, you're only paying 54,000. So it's good to diversify is what I'm trying to say. Not, again, it's a balance, you know, I don't think you want to be all one. There are cities I know of, North Kansas City is, if you ever driven through there, as you head down I-35,
Yep.
that's heavily industrialized. And I bet you it's flipped. They probably have 80% or 90%, a little bit of housing in there. Nothing makes it right or wrong. They're just different, you know. It's interesting. I'll keep going. Are we done?
We talked about utilities a little bit, but we also have some fee increases, and the departments will talk about those, but we wanted to make sure we got those in front of you. So you'll see some, I think, pretty modest fee increases for various different areas. Park and Rec, which I believe has already gone to their board. The stormwater rates we've got listed out here. Planning and Housing has some fee increases. That's something we have not done, I think, for quite a few years. Rental inspection fees, that's primarily a cost recovery fee. So as expenses change there, those go up, and again, a pretty modest amount. And you'll see the cemetery and park and rec fees, and there's quite a few listed there. They list out every single program. And then also attached is different communication that's gone to you throughout the budget process. I think, I believe, Nancy, they've seen all these at least once. So we just like to put them out there again, kind of as a reminder, because I know you get a lot of different information in packets. The intermodal projected revenue and expenses on here. That's the parking ramp down at Campus Town. And then I believe you have asset and CODA.
We just, Deb, I think you've got asset recommendations before you, and Brian, is Brian here? Did you put their CODA up there? We have CODA, we also have your, could be. You got hard copies of? And how about the council special appropriations? Those are there too. Remember, these final decisions are those were made on February 8th. We just want to give it to you in advance.
Can I ask something quick about fees? Do we know if
Thank
we
you.
have any fees right now that are not recovering our costs? Have we adjusted them so that?
Well, there's some where we don't intend to
We
recover
never-
our costs. We kind of hit that in the policies in the front of the budget book. So for example, the planning fees, those don't cover the costs. Park and Rec is somewhat subsidized.
Yeah, we don't, you have to tell us which ones you do. Like we try to make the airport break even. The one time we tried to make the cemetery break even through fees, interment. Didn't have a run of interment requests. So.
Yeah, that's our goal in the cemetery, but
It
it
is a
does.
goal, it's hard to do, but
Inspections.
inspections. We like our building permits to cover its costs. Not precise because you have a downturn. We set the budget downturn in the economy, and like the pandemic hit, no one was building. Could go the other way around. You have an estimate for low construction, all of a sudden, boom, you get a big high school comes in. That's a big cash. So it varies, but we do subsidize. We subsidize Parks and Rec, and we try to make the golf course and the ice arena break even in terms of its operating costs. They don't generate enough in case we have to make a big capital improvement, so we infuse local option sales tax in there sometime. There's another one I can't think of. The airport, we try to make break even on its fees, and
Well, the golf course.
Yeah, it's the golf course and the ice arena.
Yeah.
So most of them, we subsidize, quite frankly, most of them, the general fund kind of projects. When you get into the utilities, obviously, we try to make utilities break even.
We're going to have to provide a pretty substantial subsidy for the pool when that comes online.
And we told the public again, remember, it's not just paying back the debt on the building, but it could be as much as $400,000 operating subsidy. Now, we'll have to finalize those figures. That was based on a certain staffing level that maybe we could do better than. Again, it was based on some utilities that maybe there's going to be a higher upfront cost, geothermal or something, but we can lower the operating costs. And we have a lot of more work to do on that. But yeah, we try to be honest and show you what are transparent. We're always honest. What the cost of the swimming pool would cost from a capital standpoint, debt standpoint, and also the operating cost. So like always, we'll try to beat that though as we finalize the numbers. But you'll find Parks and Rec programs are subsidized heavily, even though there are user fees, it's subsidized heavily. Good question.
So next week, we're going to go over the operating budget, and that'll cover basically the front of this book, but all that rolls up into different funds. And we kind of insulate that from the rest of the budget. It all flows up that way. That's the way government accounting works. But it is important that we look at the funds and see where they are. So Nancy's going to go through those. Those are in the back of the book. There's a section there.
Yeah, so the fund section starts on page 287 with general fund. I think Dwayne's going to try and see if he can
Yeah,
pull
I'm
up
gonna
the budget
grab the
document,
budget document here.
and we can put them up on the screens as well. But as Dwayne said, the whole front part of the book is our budget, which we do by program, utilities, transportation, culture and recreation. But how we have to do accounting is by fund. And so they're kind of like just separate savings accounts for different types of money. And then they're very restrictive in their uses. And this is how, when you see the financial statements that we prepare at the end of each fiscal year, they're done by fund. And that's how we're audited by our external auditors every year. So beginning at 287 is general fund, which I won't go into a lot of detail. That's the one we've talked about a lot because that's property taxes is the basic portion of this. How we come up with it, I think we talked about this before. We don't start with what we want our property tax levy to be and work our way back. We start with the departments, entering their budgets for what they need to provide the services that they want and what revenues that they think those services will provide, because there are other revenues, as you can see in this area. Parks and Recreation, for example, has fees, and the library has some fees. And then we kind of back into that additional dollar amount we need to balance our budget, and that's how we set our property tax rates. So you can see as you go through, there's a lot of different revenues and expenses listed here, but when you get to the bottom of page 289, you can see that it comes down, the revenues equal the expense. There's no net change in the fund for 22-23, and that we still have met our target of 25% of revenues less pass-throughs, and we still have a $991,000 unreserved fund balance that we, to be conservative, like to keep just to see what the effects are going to be going forward of the loss of the state replacement tax, and just, not knowing for sure, how the pandemic's going to go and play out and affect some of the other general fund revenues for like Parks and Recreation, for example.
So a couple of things I want to point out here. First of all, if you look at operation expenses in the general fund relates to property taxes. I'm pretty proud of the fact that all the departments were financed by property taxes. Notice their increase in expenditure is only 3%. That's pretty good. You have to understand the general fund, things like police, fire, library, a lot of those are dominated. The budgets are dominated by personal services. And when you roll up, we have our salaries, we roll up retirement costs and your healthcare costs, which is very low compared to everybody else, still a 7% increase. Having an overall increase in operational costs in the general fund of 3% is pretty impressive to me. Also, I want to emphasize We always like the rating agencies. We get our great bond rating agencies in the general fund. They like to see revenue equal expenditures in any one fiscal year. If you look at our funds, you'll see our funds in the utilities. We constantly set the rates and then we draw down the money. So sometimes our expenditures exceed our revenues, but it's a planned drawdown. They don't like to see that in the general fund. So that's why when you come to me and say, hey, I want to do something extra, I usually tell you, let's put it in the current year. Okay, the current year, we could carry it forward, we have to. If we would take just a balance, general fund balance, the money I'm telling you, and we would add it now into next year's fund, it might show that we didn't raise enough taxes to cover our expenditures. Even though it's one time, Dwayne's got to go to them and explain to them, and they don't like that. So there may be some things we need to add. I may tell you to add it in the current year, and we'll carry forward. And then you'll see all the transfers, some of the big things we talked about in terms of the movement, the council priorities. You see that. You'll see the parking fund movement. All that's in there under transfers on page 289. I talked about moving the 500,000 in the parking fund. Council priorities is $1 million plus the other 200,000 is $1 million too. You'll see it there.
Steve, if I could on that. So we obviously had a very robust community conversation on parking a couple of years ago. At what point will council need to bring this up again? Is that a this year topic? Is that a next year? When
Next
do we
year, we're going to have to. We need to have a good year without the pandemic. Maybe we're coming out of it. I don't know, because we're going to have to see what revenue we can rely on. What's the new normal in terms of violations which generate revenue, parking meter revenue, how many people are coming down, rentals, all those kind of things. We're going to have to see what the revenue is. We're going to have to project our expenditures, and then we're going to have to give you options on how you finance the parking fund.
So you think that's a 2023 topic?
It's a 23, 24 topic. That's right. Next fiscal year.
Okay.
If everything goes right. If we get a terrible year again, something, I don't know what happens in the pandemic and we don't get a normal year, we'll have to stretch it out. But I don't know what the new normal is yet.
Right.
I do not know. Plus, I don't know if we're going to add the parking ramp behind Wells Fargo, which is connected with the development along Lincoln Way. Boy, that puts another operating expenditure in place, revenue expenditures. As I told you before, this is not going to be popular. We're going to have to redo the whole parking fee structure in the downtown if you have a parking ramp.
Right.
We're finding that problem on campus town, quite frankly. It's cheaper to park on the street than it is to pay inside the parking ramp. So we're not doing so well. I mean, we're lucky we're doing it there because we're doing what we didn't want to do. We're renting those spaces out long-term. It's predominantly long-term, but that's not what we want. We want to keep those spaces open for people, customers in the area. If it's just a long-term rental, it's financially good, but I don't think that's what we want in downtown necessarily. We want it open for people come and go. So it's going to be tough decisions for you to make, and we'll have to give you some options for that. But it will be probably for next year's budget. We got to give it to you probably in the summer. We got to start talking to you about that.
Just want to make sure that we set the table with that conversation with robust, then conversations with the downtown.
I guarantee you it's going to be robust.
That it will be.
Say, but Nancy, back on
Sure.
289. I see on the under CIP, there's
Mhm.
nothing recommended under the 22-23 column.
No, we don't normally use general fund to finance the CIP. I mean, there have been a couple of instances, small ones in the past, but typically the CIP that you see in the adjusted are ones that have come about when we've had those fund balances, additional fund balances left over from the prior year or the current year. And that's the one-time use of the fund balance that Steve recommends to use for that. So you can see how many there are here that we've been able to do over the last few years. And a lot of these are ones that were maybe approved in a prior year and the funding has just been carried forward. I think the downtown plaza, for example, we started carrying some money forward to set aside for that project maybe 3 years ago even. So those fund balances really help out to fund some of those additional CIP projects.
So the money that came from for CIP from a different pipeline
Mhm.
gets deposited in the general fund that is carried in the general fund after that.
Well, it's if we have savings from because of position vacancies. This year we had in 21, 22, we had that big influx of local option sales tax money, which of 60% went to the general fund. So we had, that additional $3 million of balance so that's where we can kind of fund these kind of one-time projects there. So these aren't really things they're things either that we didn't have in the regular CIP funding from other sources like GO bonds or things, or they're things that maybe we didn't have enough funding for, like the downtown plaza, and we had to put some additional general fund money toward.
Well, you'll see we didn't adopt it the year before. Remember, we didn't adopt it and we used the savings. Last year we had substantial savings and we did one-time things. So it shows up in the adjusted column, not the adopted column.
Yep.
Normally I wouldn't fund capital improvements with general fund. It would come out of local option tax or one of the other funds, it could be road use tax or whatever. So
And same for the council priorities funds. The reason it's not showing up in manager recommend is because it's coming out of a different,
no,
coming out of general fund, right?
no, it's coming out of general fund. Remember, so I'm showing it in this year, not in next year, because if we use a balance, then revenue wouldn't equal expenditures for the year. So that's why I show it in this year. See that?
Yeah. We're trying to keep it out of that property tax.
I'm trying to keep it out of
calculation.
22, 23, because when the grading agencies look at it, they'll say your taxes that you generate weren't sufficient to cover your budget because we used a balance. So what I do is I show it in this fiscal year. You see that? It's shown in this fiscal year. And if we don't get it done, we'll carry it forward and it'll come in it'll show up in the adjusted budget.
Okay.
Not making sense?
Not
Not
we
really?
can talk more about that. I just, yeah.
Okay, so any other questions about general fund?
On page 288, the instructional programs,
Yes.
which are down 12.3%. I just wondered what's included in that
Okay,
category.
so that would be, and Keith can talk about it a little more when he does Parks and Rec. So the instructional programs are typically the more youth-oriented Parks and Rec programs, and I believe they're probably down. I think they're still conservative on how many
Right.
kids are going to have come back for programs and things.
Will parents let their people in our combined
Right.
spaces?
Mhm.
So I
We'll
think-
go over that in Parks and Rec,
Okay,
and Keith will be
perfect.
able to answer all those questions for you.
Thank
Good.
you.
The other thing I want to point out, electric utility, we have a municipal utility that doesn't pay taxes, but for those of you who don't remember, we charge our electric utility a payment in lieu of tax because we do not want to penalize our citizens by not having a private sector utility. And we do it pretty, I think, pretty responsibly. We charge the utility, the payment in lieu is based on applying our city tax rate towards the book value. We have a accounting in our audit that puts the asset value of the utility, all its distribution lines and the power plant. So we multiply those and we come up with a number. So that means if we didn't do a lot of new capital improvement, the old capital improvement is depreciated or something, it's possible in years that the amount goes down, the payment of tax. There are cities that have municipal utilities, I'm telling you, they take advantage of it and they use it just to subsidize property taxes with no rationale for doing it. We just need another $2 million because we want to have an increase of only 1%. Let's take it from the electric utility. We don't do that. We live and die by that formula, which I think is good. I think it's good. Okay, anything else in general fund? Okay, local option, Nancy?
Okay, so on page 290, we look at local option sales tax, and as we talked about this one, but here you can maybe see it a little bit better when you look at the revenues. You can see that for 21, 22, we had adopted, I'll look up above the hotel motel transfer, about 8.9 million that we expected to receive this year. But we always get a reconciliation payment for the prior year in November. And when we got it this year, it was substantially higher than we expected. So you can see that for 21, 22, we are actually for this year now, we're projecting $11.2 million in local option sales tax revenue. So then for next year, Dwayne projected, we did 10%, which we thought maybe seemed a little aggressive, but Dwayne's been monitoring it, and we think that actually that's probably, on target for what we're seeing as of right now.
That's aggressive for Dwayne. He's not, he plays defense. He doesn't press. I mean, he doesn't charge on. That's good.
So just a couple of other interesting things I think in local option sales tax that you'll notice if you look over on page 291 on the transfers, you can, 60% of it gets transferred to the general fund, of course, as property tax reduction. We always transfer $100,000 to the park development fund every year. But this year in the adjusted year, you'll also see there's an additional $219,000 transfer to park development. That's money that we had set aside in the CIP for municipal improvements. We would always have a project in there every year, and we would accumulate the money until we needed to do something. And since the municipal pool is closing, we're transferring that money to the park development fund instead to use for some other uses, necessary for the park system.
Now, you understand, that's my recommendation. You don't have to do that, but I thought it was connected to Parks and Recreation. So we moved it into there. You can also take out from that if you want to, but that helps us. There's many years ago, the council wanted to have money they could react to. If a new park came in, somebody donated, it wasn't budgeted our capital improvement, we can move to that to fix it up. Our land became available. We had to move to buy land. So that gets drawn down all the time. In fact, we're trying to build that up again. But the school would have a comparable kind of fund, I'm sure, from their side. What they do with it, it's up to them because we shared the cost, remember, 50-50. But we won't need it anymore, unfortunately, because municipal pool's going away. So I thought that'd be a good place to put it right now.
So that could be money we could use too if the new pool costs are greater than we expect that they are.
Yep. We try to do it with for new stuff, not your maintenance or repair. Doesn't
Ongoing.
mean
Yeah.
couldn't do.
Yeah.
Yeah, ongoing stuff. But that'd be something you could pull out. You control that. And
Okay.
Nancy, what's included under parking operations for
That
$5,400?
Yep, that is when you will see Brian's report for the council grant program. There's always a little bit from local option to cover what the events that are downtown when we waive the parking fees, and that's where that shows up in a fund. It comes out of local option sales tax.
And what is covered on page 290 under the city council grant program?
So that would be that program. So when you have your allocations, like for example, to Ames Historical Society and the youth sports complex and things, those are the ones that are funded through local option sales tax. There's always one that's also from Hotel Motel.
the workforce contribution, the workforce, the ADC, we take out a hotel motel, economic development. So that should match your recommendations that Brian gave
Yep.
you for outside funding requests.
Yeah,
See if that matches, should match.
I think it did. I think I checked it before we came up today after I
Hope it
saw it. And then just one other it's a smaller dollar amount, but we do a transfer every year to the Ames ISU Ice Arena. That's their capital reserve fund. We have contributed $20,000 historically to that fund for capital improvements there, and then Iowa State has contributed $20,000 for, I think, since it was constructed.
Yeah, since the beginning.
This year, you'll see in 22-23, it's going up to $40,000, and Iowa State's contribution is also going to up to $40,000 because the improvements that they need to do have gotten more expensive, of course, over time, and so that's trying to build that fund up for some improvements at the ice arena. Does anybody else have any questions over local option sales tax? The next one is the hotel motel tax fund. This one has, over time built up a fairly healthy fund balance. We used a little bit of it in 21-22, as you are aware, because we approved that last year to go to the Ames Convention and Visitors Bureau for the COVID relief payment of $35,000. We have dropped the loan because they've determined that they don't need that funding for this year. We do use this for CIP. We've used it a little bit for the downtown plaza. We used a little bit for the study and also for the aquatic center, some of the initial consulting fees and things for that. I don't know if you have any questions about hotel motel. The largest portion of this comes to us in hotel motel taxes, but it's a pass through to the Ames Convention and Visitors Bureau, which you can see in that top line under the expenses.
So I think we've been conservative here, but those of you on the Convention of Israel know more than I. You can see how it was hit substantially back in 2021. It seems to be coming back. I guess we're pretty conservative on,
We've kept it level for
we
this
kept it
year.
level. It may be better than that, but I wanted to point out, the council it was a request by the Convention of Israel that you grant them $35,000 to help them get through these tough times. Plus, there was an additional, how much more they were going to take out on the loan?
75.
75 in the loan. I think we've gotten notification that they don't want to pursue that loan
Right.
anymore.
Mhm.
So that's why you see it zeroed out. But we did give the grant of 35,000. I think that's already been passed to them. And you'll see under CIP, under the Aquatic Center, there's some upfront costs that we just don't have budgeted, and we took it out of here because it's dealing with economic development too. It was in the urban renewal area. We're going to have to do some environmental studies. Remember, some studies and other upfront costs we had to get appraisals and all sorts of things. So I think we've got money plugged into that before we even issue bonds. There's some upfront. Oh, we had to do some conceptual work. I think we paid the architect for the conceptual work out of there. And what else is there? Is there anything else, Nancy?
I think that was the majority of it.
So hopefully are you on the Convention of Israel? Are you are you anticipating even a greater increase for next year? This is
Yeah.
pretty conservative. This is flat. You know what
On
they're-
what the pass-through is?
From the city, yeah. Do you
Yeah.
know, is he estimating higher than this? You'll get whatever it is. So it's not like, because we put in here a certain amount, if it comes in more, you get it. But I don't know what the board is.
I don't know that we're estimating more than this. I can't remember offhand. I can look to see.
I just want to tell you, this was pretty conservative, flat.
Yeah, they are not planning for a tremendous increase in that amount, but I don't know if that is the amount.
Okay, just wanted to point out,
They're
Don't-
still on a reduced budget,
are they?
so.
But don't worry, because whatever this number is, we're going to pass through the amount, regardless of what this says. Okay? Any questions on that? Road use tax?
And so on page 293 is road use tax. This is the funding that we get from the fuel tax from the state. You can see that it's up 7.2%. We had a bump based on the census results. This is very special. We're very restricted on what we can use this funding for streets and related things like that. And this is the fund that we use that funds almost all of the Public Works Department's operations that involve transportation. The utility things would be funded through, like water and sewer work that they do would be funded through the utilities. But as you can see with the list of expenses and operations, it covers the street maintenance, snow and ice control, traffic operations, public works administration, and engineering. And then as well as we use it for CIP projects.
Nancy, can you just remind us, I'm sure there's an easy answer here on the shared use path is declining 5.8%. We're increasing our shared use path budget. I apologize, I'm not connecting those.
A lot of that
dots.
comes out of local option tax, remember?
Yeah. I think it's it's $8,000, and they might have reduced it slightly. If you look in the adjusted budget, they have a fairly substantial carryover amount in the current year too. So it might have been partly a plan trying to get caught up on projects and then
Okay.
budgeting 130 for next year.
So this has nothing to do with the price tag of the projects. This is a question of there's less money coming out of road use.
Yeah,
For that.
I don't think we reduced shared use path
Okay, that helps.
overall.
Previous was-
It's just one
was
funding
over your
source.
1.1
Right.
million. We had it in the CIP.
Yeah.
That comes out of the capital improvement projects themselves where we tie on the shared path, right?
Right.
And then we also have local option tax and then road use tax. So don't
I was
forget
just
the other sources.
I was anticipating an increase in that line because the overall expenditures are going up, but we must be pulling more money from
Yeah.
other sources.
Well, I can pull out your capital improvement. I don't have it.
It's okay.
Well,
It's okay.
Yeah, it's 905,000 in shared use past CIP for 22-23. So you can see this is just like one portion of it.
Cool. Thanks.
Nancy, do you know what the RISE repayment is for?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. That is an unusual one in here. So we are having to pay, maybe Dwayne, you can explain that a little bit more, but we have
Yeah.
to pay half of,
That was a economic development incentive through the state for the development of the traffic circles in the area around Workiva. And we're not paying back all of it, but there was a employment target for that, and they didn't make the target. So there's a certain amount need to pay back. And they also had a substantial reduction in its incentive from the city
So
also.
fortunately, we negotiated, we became partners with Iowa State University. They'll pay 50% of that amount. And also the state allowed us to pay it back over, is it 5 years or 4 years? Remember?
do you remember, Dwayne, is it 5 or 4?
I don't
It's
remember.
4 or
if
5
John's
years.
still here.
So we didn't have to come up with a
He's still
lump
working on
sum.
So
That
this
was
is,
helpful.
yeah, the part in
Sorry.
road use tax is where we're paying for our portion of it.
Right.
When we get to the economic development fund, you'll see the other half, and then you'll see an offsetting revenue coming from ISU Research Park to pay for their half.
The grant was substantially more than that. This is the
I
portion. you
remember
pay
that
back.
discussion.
Yeah, I gave you all that information on that before. Yeah, so Workiva didn't have the numbers, the appointment numbers they had projected.
It's just a big difference in this road use tax page between the adopted and adjusted 21-22 budgets when it comes to traffic improvements and street rehab. The adopted,
Are you
CIP.
talking about the CIP, Bronwyn?
yes.
Yes. So that's typical. We have the budget, the adopted budget is always lower, and then we carry over any projects that weren't done from the year before. So the adjusted budget is almost always substantially higher than either the adopted budget or the manager recommended budget. Because it's projects that were approved and funded in other years, and the funding has just been carried forward because they weren't completed.
Okay, I see.
So when we come in September for that first amendment and we have that list of all those projects that are being carried forward, that's kind of where they show up in all of the different funds.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Sure. On page 294, we have a number of public safety special revenues. The police has forfeiture funding that they get from evidence and things that are forfeited that they can use for, there need to be, I believe, they're restricted to things that are outside of the budget that they can use on that. They do pay for our part of the drug enforcement task force out of this fund. They also have some grants that they're always applying for and getting. We have, typically we have ballistic vest grants that we get almost every year. Fire has also started getting more grant funding. And then one of the largest ones in this area also is the animal shelter donations is in this category as well. But we bring the funds in and we're held, they're held exclusively for the use of those separate and individual activities, and so that we can always track them and know where they stand. And the next few that are coming up are ones that are the housing programs. So on page 295, you have the Citywide housing program. This is revenue that was left over from when we had the countywide program, and Vanessa uses this funds to offset some of the local match or some of the portions of things on CDBG projects that aren't eligible for CDGB funding. She also uses it for just some different special event things that she does. Her meals for the homeless and things like that would be coming from this fund.
Also, her staff, not everything we charge out to CDBG or home. She does other projects. You've got to pay her out of, this is where we pay the difference, where where we're not able to charge out the CDBG or home funding.
Right. So then on page 296 is the Community Development Block Grant Fund, which accounts for all of our block grant funding, the largest part of which has been for the last year or two being used for the Picker subdivision project. Vanessa will go over all of these in a lot more detail when she does her presentation. And then on page 297 is the home program, which we haven't used as much lately. So she has a substantial amount of rollover money that she hasn't spent, but that is going to be started to be used now for the construction of homes in Baker subdivision. Then on page 298, these are, as Steve mentioned earlier, we have this additional funding that we're getting for that Vanessa's administering. We have CDBG COVID-19 money. We spent part of this, and we still have about $235,000 left to spend this year. That's been being used for rent assistance, for utility assistance, and for mortgage assistance for people. And on page 299, we also have money from the state for the same purpose that Vanessa's still developing programs for. So I'm sure she'll talk about that when she does her presentation next week. And then on page 300, we have the Home American Rescue Plan funding that we know we've have had an allocation of a little over 1.2 million, also to be used for programming that she still needs to develop. So may I have any questions about any of those? Page 301 is the employee benefit property tax. This is where the money comes in that Dwayne talked about from the levy that we use for police and fire retirement. The property tax revenue comes into this fund, and then we transfer it to the general fund to cover the cost of the pension contributions for the police and fire retirement system. And on page 302 is the fund that Dwayne talked about. This is the leftover money from when we went to the statewide police and fire retirement system that's been slowly being whittled down as we use that balance to offset some of those large increases in the contribution rates over the years. So as you can see, we're down to about, at the end of 22-23, 72,000 left. And Dwayne showed you earlier the plan that it'll probably be completely spent down over the next several years. And on page 303 is Parks and Recreation donations and grants. They get quite a few donations for different projects and things. As you can see, a lot of times they're just for operations. People want to have a bench put in a park or a tree planted, but we have had some substantial ones for CIP projects in here recently. The largest are the accessible launch at Ada Hayden Park, and then we also have a donation from the homeowners in the Sunset Ridge Park area that we can use to do additional amenities at those parks when they're developed.
What was the large expense at Daly Park?
I think it's not really, we haven't had the expense, they just have that money available to spend there. I budget their donation money so that they'll remember that they have it to spend, because there's so many little pots of it that sometimes I think they were getting overlooked. So we budget it like they're spending it, but it won't necessarily get spent this year. However, we have discussed that with the splash pad going in Daly Park, that would be a good opportunity to maybe use some of that funding for any additional features there. On page 304 and 305, we have Dwayne and I's favorite FEMA funds. The first one we set up for expenses and for COVID-19. We budget that we're going to be 100% reimbursed, and we're still waiting for that. And then on page 305, it's the fund, the expenses that were done, and then our anticipated revenue to offset that from FEMA for the derecho expenses from 2020.
How is there a $5 beginning balance?
I think it's just rounding, and then we had to get the revenues and expenses to break even. And then on page 306 is the American Rescue Plan. This was the funding that Steve has talked about for using for special projects like the sewer and water extensions. You can see we received one half of the funding that we expect to receive in 2021. We're anticipating the other one will come in March, I believe,
March,
of
yes.
21-22. The different CIP projects that he outlined are shown here. And as you can see, there's still a balance at the end of 22-23, but if you remember in your CIP, there were water and sewer extension lines also programmed into 23-24. that will use a substantial portion of that balance that remains at the end of 22-23. Then on page 307, just like Parks and Rec, the library has a very robust donations and grants program. The Library Friends Foundation is a large supporter of some of the additional services and programs that the library offers. They also have some miscellaneous donations, as well as they get some direct state aid that we bring into this program. And they can do a lot of additional activities because of this additional funding that they receive. Then starting on page 308, we have some smaller funds, the utility assistance at the top of page 308. It's kind of made up of two parts, project share and the alternative energy donations, which are contributions you can make when you pay your utility bill. We do use the project share donations to help offset people that need their utility bills, some assistance with that. So that's been a good program for the city for many years. Down under miscellaneous donations, this is just kind of a miscellaneous. We have Metro Coalition right now. We're administering the funds for the Metro Coalition. So we show the revenue coming in from the different member cities, and then we are paying the expenses for that. We have some shared use path. The shared use path CIP is money actually that's left over in a bike license fund from when we used to charge for bike licenses at the city. So we anticipate at some point we'll use that for the shared use pass system. I think right now the thought is that it will be used for the signage that they want to do, the wayfaring signage. But we've had over time, sometimes we've had like public art donations or some other kind of miscellaneous ones that would fall into this category as well. Developer projects are when we have had a developer make a contribution and then we hold it over a certain period of time until the conditions are right to do some additional work on a development. We held money in this for quite a few years, and then we finally got to the point where we used the most recent example I can think of when we used it was for the Oakwood Road bike path several years ago. But we are still holding some funds here for different projects. And then the Economic Development Fund at the bottom is where you can see the funding coming in. This fund hasn't had a lot of activity since I've been doing the budget, but we do actually have the funding coming in from the ISU Research Park to pay their half of that RISE grant repayment, and then we budget the expense going out. And then on page 310, we have our TIF funds for the tax increment financing. And a large proportion of this we've issued debt to construct these projects, and then as we get the TIF payments in, or it comes in to offset that. For many years, these had a negative fund balance. We actually have positive fund balance in our TIF funds right now, and you can see we still have the payments going out to Kingland and Brill. I think Dwayne referred to how far out those would go.
Yeah, I don't remember the number of years. Brill is only about 2 years in, but Kingland will be paid off in the next few years, or they'll hit their maximum rebate, and then that'll just go to general taxation. The debt service one's very good news. And as Nancy mentioned, that's been negative for years, and it's growing positive, but at a point soon that stops, and we've collected enough to pay that debt as it comes due, and we'll see those whittle down. So that's something that we've watched pretty closely. We had one that went a bit slower than we would have liked, and it's good to see that all positive now.
We'd like to get it paid, those TIFs paid off less than 10 years. The Bell one took a little longer, et cetera, the small lot ones.
Yeah, the timing of doing that in 2008, 2009, right when the credit crisis started, got that off to a very slow start.
But more and more people are coming in and asking for a 20-year TIF, which is a lot longer, obviously, than our normal standard.
Then on page 311 is special assessments, which is similar to TIF in that we sometimes issue debt that's going to be abated by special assessments. So we issue the debt, we start making the transfers to cover that debt out of the special assessment fund sooner than we're collecting the reimbursement in special assessments through people's property taxes. So that we have a negative balance in every year, and that's very typical. Over time, we do recover the assessment funding. And so then each individual assessment does break even over time. On page 312 is the street construction fund. This is where we account for any sort of outside funding for any of our street projects other than our GO debt. So this would be any federal funding or state funding. If Iowa State University makes a contribution to a project, or the county. So you can kind of see the different funding sources listed at the top. So it'll go quite a bit negative because it's a reimbursement basis. We'll have expenditures, and then we'll collect it's typically grant money after the project is completed. An airport construction fund, every year we transfer money from the general fund from our profit that we make on the airport farmland into this fund. So that's the transfer that you'll see from the general fund and under the revenues. Is our local match for any of the airport CIP projects that have received federal funding. So you also see the revenue of the FAA funding in there. And I think we talked about this during CIP time. Typically, we've just used our general fund transfer for our local match, but we don't think the fund is going to be robust enough to fund all of the projects that are coming up at the airport. So we have in the CIP added some general obligation bond funding for airport projects. And page 314 is the Park Development Fund. We had used this over the last number of years because we had several CIP projects that had a few shortfalls. So last year when we had a general fund balance, as you can see up under the 2021 actuals, we did transfer $600,000 last year from the general fund balance to kind of reestablish this fund and have it available for other park projects going forward. That we're anticipating that we'll continue to, do the $100,000 transfer from local option sales tax every year. And then here's where you can see the other side of that transfer from local options tax for the municipal pool CIP project that we've closed out. We've transferred it to park development instead. And then on page 315 is the Winokur donation fund. This used to be combined with park development. We split them out last year so that we could track them separately a little more easily. This is funding that we've held from the Gita Winokur estate for a number of years for a park project. And you can see now for the first time, we've actually budgeted expenditures here looking for doing the indoor aquatic center project. Then on page 316 is a brand new fund. This is the Indoor Aquatic Center Donations Fund. This is where we anticipate that we'll track the donations that we receive for that capital project. And so the revenues and the expenses that you see here match what we showed, what we were projecting to do in 22-23 with donations in the capital improvement plan. Then on page 317 is the Council Priorities Fund. This is the new fund we established last year. We transferred $1 million into it. And then the funding was determined to be used for the Downtown Plaza project, which you can see is budgeted in 22-23. But then we also have transferred in the $1 million that Steve talked about for possible future CIP projects, and also an additional $200,000 for sustainability projects. On page 318 is the bond proceeds fund. It looks like one fund here, but really we do a separate fund for every year of the bond issue. And this is where we account for all of the CIP projects that have bond issuances, and as they spend the money down over a number of years. This is another one where you'll see, as Bronwyn mentioned, that the adjusted year is much larger than the adopted year because of the carryover of those projects. Typically, they take several years to complete. Anybody have any questions? Going too quickly or anything? Okay. So on page 319, we have two what we call permanent funds at the city, which are really trust funds. And these are true trust funds where we can't spend the principal. So one is the perpetual care fund for the cemetery. So anytime a cemetery plot is sold, a proportion of it, well, it says, I guess in the description, 20% goes to this fund, and it's held in perpetuity for the care of the cemetery. So we can't spend the principal held in this fund, but the interest that's earned on it, we do transfer to the general fund, and it can be used to help operations in the cemetery fund. Then the Donald and Ruth Furman Aquatic Center Trust Fund, the principal is held in trust, but we can't expend the interest. And Parks and Rec has programmed in a couple of different things. One in their operations to spend $20,000 in the current year, and the other one is $45,000, which I believe was for motors that will help reduce their electricity use. So they wanted to get it done before this season opened because it would really reduce their electrical costs. Then on page 320, we're moving into now the enterprise funds. We talked earlier about what our cost recovery philosophy is. Enterprise funds are set up to operate more like a business. The other ones are like segregated. They can only be used for special purposes, but none of them have a true revenue recovery. The enterprise and internal service funds are accounted for more like a business, with the revenues expected to cover the expenses. So the water utility, which John Dunn will talk about when he talks about rates, he monitors this very closely and projects it out 20 years. And so he knows where the rate increases need to be. But this is all of the operations for the water utility. As you can see, we have a target balance, and we're exceeding that by $10 million. We have a $10 million unreserved fund balance there right now.
But you look at the net change of the fund, this is what I'm saying. We are drawing down $2 million, knowing that. We know we have a big balance. We'll draw it down. John looks at that, and that's how he plans out when we have to have increases. We try not to have an increase every year. So we do intentionally draw down the balance.
Right.
So the rating agents don't mind seeing that negative.
Then on page 322, a water construction fund is we separate out if we're doing projects with the state revolving fund loan funding. So that is just the revenue and expense. The expenses for those projects that you'll see in the CIP are being funded through the state revolving loan program. And then the revenue that we expect to offset that fund should always break even. And then down below that is the water sinking fund, which is we transfer money from the water operations into this fund, and then we make the loan payments for principal and interest on those SRF loans through this fund. And then 323 is the sewer utility, similar to the water. The fees that we charge are expected to cover the expenses. And you can see the fund balance is, again, very healthy on page 324. And then again, as like with the water, there's also a sewer improvements fund where the SRF funding is segregated out because we need to do that for the projects that are funded that way. And then we also on 325, there's a sewer sinking fund, which we use to track the debt service payments. And on 326 is the electric utility. And we are now, and as we said, we're not anticipating any rate increases over the next 5 years. And similar to the other two utilities on 328 and 329, well, I take that back. They don't have a construction fund like the other ones do because we don't have any revenue bond projects that we're using right now. But they do have a sinking fund because we're still paying the principal and interest on the revenue bonds that we issued last for that. But on then 329, we do have a separate fund for them, the SunSmart Community Solar Fund. This is, we used to do the, track the contributions for when people purchase the power packs, and the funds sit here and will be drawn down over time as we purchase the solar energy. Also, Iowa State does buy solar energy from us through this program. And then as you can see, there's the transfer from the electric utility fund. the power plant purchases, the balance that isn't covered by the power pack purchases or by Iowa State.
Do you happen to know how many power packs are still available?
I
Or what percentage
I
are
don't.
available?
Don will know when he.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll cover
yeah,
that
that'd be a
later.
good question for Don during his presentation. I know it's slowed down, but we still have sold quite a few this year.
I don't know if you come up the steps of City Hall, you'll see the television set there. It shows what's happening out in,
Oh,
you ever seen that?
yeah.
Then on 330 is the parking operations fund, and this is the one we've talked about that we are really watching closely. And that we think we need to come up with a strategy for how to continue to fund it. When we were doing our budget meetings, we looked back, trying to go back to a normal year for how the revenues looked, and we're still not close to what we were pre-pandemic, although it has rebounded a little bit. Our goal to have an ending balance is have it to be 10% of operations. To get to that this year, as you can see, if you look up under the revenues, under the transfers, we had to transfer $20,709 back from the parking reserve in order to hit our minimum balance that we wanted in the operations fund.
Yeah, that's not good. So we got to figure this out.
Yeah. And then on page 331 is the parking capital reserve, which is where we had anticipated we could transfer excess revenues from operations here to start building up a fund that we could do parking capital improvements that are needed coming up in the next several years. We're building it up much more slowly than we had hoped, but this is where you can see up under the revenues, the $500,000 transfer from the general fund balance to help, build up this fund a little bit so that we can maybe start addressing some of the parking maintenance issues that we're having at some of the parking lots. And Damien has already started putting together a list of, prioritizing the projects and seeing what the costs are for what we're going to need, and wanted fund balance information on parking from me going back to 1994. So I think he's putting together a lot of data to analyze the situation.
But that's what we thought last year. We put the 600,000 in, and basically we had to use it to cover operations. You see how it drew it down?
Yeah.
It drew it down.
Got
So think of it as it's the combination of those two we've got to figure out. Because if we're in trouble again next year, I'll have to pull that 500,000 back into operations to make it cover itself.
So then on 332 and 333, we go into transit. They have three funds: transit operations, the student government trust fund, and then their capital reserve. Dwayne's passing out revised transit operations and transit student government trust fund pages. After we had the budget put together, we had a discussion about, as Steve was mentioning, that the student fees are not covering their cost of operations. So they really need to transfer an amount back to operations to cover the part that they're not funding. So you'll see on our student government trust fund here on page 333, we don't have the transfer budgeted, but we are going to add it to the budget. Barb calculated what she anticipates it will be. It depends on some factors going through the rest of the year, but this is an approximation. So you'll see, I don't have my revised page here, but I think it's $400 and some thousand dollars.
56.
Yeah, that will transfer. So you'll see
I'm
the,
sorry, it's 462.
yeah,
Thank you.
will be transferred from the student government trust to the transit operations fund.
And we're still below our goal, right?
Yeah, I believe the goal was 500,000,
Right.
and so it's at
327 by the end
saved
of
one
the
for
year.
myself, yeah. Yeah, so it's at the 22, end of 22, 23, it's 327, 540. That's not looking at if they'll need to transfer money again out of the trust in 22, 23. This was just the one-time transfer in 21, 22.
Right.
Another thing on the transit operations fund on 332 that you'll notice is down toward the bottom under the transfers, we do a transfer every year to the Capital Reserve Fund, which is then used for our local match for bus purchases or facility improvements. And because of all the additional federal funding we've gotten, typically it's been $800,000 a year. In 21-22, their transit board has approved to transfer $5.3 million to that capital reserve fund and 1.4 in 22-23, which is substantially larger than we would normally transfer.
And you said that's because of the federal funding?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, if you look up under the very top line under revenues, under federal funding, you can see we adopted 4.2. Now we're adjusting it to 7.3. We're expecting 5.2 next year. It was higher. Last year we had 7.6 actual in 2021. So there's a higher fund balance that they can transfer and still maintain what they want for their operations. So if you go to 334, you can see their capital reserve fund. This is where they pay for all of their capital improvements, buses, facility improvements, bus stop improvements. The majority of this is federal and state funding. And they the fund balance is built up to 4.7 million at the end of 22-23, even with a fairly, substantial CIP projects budgeted for that year. And on page 335 is the stormwater utility. As we talked about with the fee increases, we are projecting a 5% increase here. The stormwater fees actually is up 5.6%. That's a little bit because of growth that we would have had anyway. This fund is used to mostly for the operations portion of the CIP, the maintenance things that go on with that, but it also pays for some of the CIP projects, not the large substantial projects. Those we almost always issue GO bonds for, or we have federal grants sometimes for those projects. And on page 336 is follow the Stormwater Improvements Fund. This is where we account for the grant or developer funding, any outside funding related for the stormwater CIP projects. The SRF grant program is one where the SRF loans that we use for funding water and sewer projects, we can get the interest that we earn back as grants, and we use that to help fund some of the stormwater improvement projects. I think the majority of the federal and state grant line, the 3.5 million, is the federal funding that we're using for the project on South Duff. Then on 337, it's the Ames ISU Ice Arena. This is the operations fund for this project. And as we mentioned earlier, when we talked about the fees, we do expect the fees to cover the expenses, and any net revenue that they have every year is carried forward and held in this fund. And then on page 338 is the Ice Arena Capital Reserve. This is the one I mentioned earlier that we contribute $20,000 to every year, and Iowa State contributed $20,000. Both of those amounts are going up to $40,000 in 22-23 to help build up the fund balance a little bit for some needed improvements at the facility. And on 339 is Homa Golf Course. This fund was one that was not hurt by the pandemic. People did still get out and golf, and so the fund balance here has been doing pretty well overall. And the new clubhouse is up and running. You'll see that there's some funding budgeted for clubhouse rental in here.
What happened with the cell tower lease there? That's down 50%.
There's a cell tower there, and it did. Is Brian still here? Yeah. So can you explain the cell tower, why it decreased? There's a cell tower back in the woods there, and they pay rental to us to have it there.
Yeah, it's decreasing, right? Yeah. We get base rent from the owner of the tower,
Okay.
And then we also, so that's a certain amount per month, a couple $1,000s.
Mm,
And then we also get 50% of any sublease revenue
mm.
that the owner of the tower earns. So as they have lessees on the tower, we get a chunk of that. Unfortunately, the subleaser that was on there left, and so we don't control any of that decision, but it's a big cut to our revenues.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last enterprise fund is on page 340. This is the Resource Recovery Fund. This brings in all of the different revenues from the commercial haulers to the per capita funding from both Ames and the other participating communities to cover the operating expenses and any capital improvements at Resource Recovery. And as you know from the conversations we've had, this is a very dynamic utility and maybe having a lot of changes coming up in the near future. But for now, the revenues that we have are covering the cost of the expenses. And then we'll see what happens in the future with this fund. Then on page 342 is a debt service fund. This is the fund we use for all of the principal and interest payments on all of our general obligation debt. And Dwayne talked a little bit about we are using how we use the fund balance. You can see that they're in the transfers, the second one down, that general fund of $900,000 in the 21-22 is the one we talked about coming from the general fund excess balance in the current year. That's kind of an unusual one that you would see here, but we're hoping that that will be able to alleviate the debt service tax levy increases in the future. Then on page 343, we start internal services. We have a number of funds that we use just mostly to serve ourselves. So they are operated like a business, but the departments that use them pay fees to use their services, and they're not meant to make a profit. They're just meant to serve the other departments and make operations more efficient. So the first one on page 343 is fleet services. This is the operations for the fleet services fund. To maintain the vehicles, maintain the motor pool. We do try to hold the fund at a certain level amount at the end of the year. So if they do have excess revenue, which Corey does a really good job of getting this to about break even so he can hold down the cost to the departments. If they do happen to have any funding left over at the end of the year, we move it into their reserve fund so that they can use it for equipment or projects that they need at their maintenance facility. And then on page 344, we call it the Fleet Replacement Reserve Fund. This is where the departments have banked money in here so they can maintain their operations at a more level rate. And the funding is held here. And then when a piece of equipment needs to be purchased, it is purchased through this funding instead of out of the department's operating budget. Then on page 345 is a new one this year called Fleet Services Reserve. This used to be mixed in with the Fleet Replacement Reserve. We decided it was a little easier for Corey to track his own money if we pulled it out and separated it to keep track of how much he has all the time. So we created in both, you'll see this in IT, the same thing. We pulled it out and created its own fund. So this would be the interest that's earned on all of the fleet replacement funds, and also if we have any net profit, it can be banked here for Corey to use, and he uses it for facility improvements and for maybe specialized equipment that he needs at the shop. Then on page 346, we have the first of the IT funds. This is their operations fund. Very similar. We do an operating fund. We set the fees that we charge all of the different departments. We just try to break even. If there is any additional revenue at the end of the year, it also gets transferred to a reserve for them to use for network improvements or things that are more costly, so we don't have to charge them to the departments. And then page 347, similarly as to the fleet ones, we have a technology replacement reserve where departments can pay in money each year so that they can keep their contributions level. And then when they need to buy a new computer or any other kind of technology equipment, the funds are available for them and they're purchased out of this fund. And then on 348 is the new one we set up to track IT's money separately. And this is the Technology Reserve Fund. So the interest that are earned on the funds they use so that they can purchase technology replacement, or we purchased the phone system when we had to replace that out of here. One that's different here that is in the adjusted year, you can see there's $20,000. This is when Steve mentioned this, what he was using his general fund balance for. We did program in $20,000 into this fund that'll be used to study possibly new software for the finance department and the human resources department. But we'd like to have some consulting dollars to see what's the best way forward for that. So we want to have the systems, work as well together as possible. And then 349 is the shared communication system. This is the MAPS G system that we share with Iowa State, Story County, the E911 system. The Ames Police Department, the fire department uses it a little bit. And now recently, over the past couple of years, Story City and Huxley also participate in this. So they have the expenditures, and then we track them all through here, and then we bill them out to all the participating entities in it so that the fund breaks even. Then we have two new ones on 350 and 351. These were actually tracked in the general fund before, but they really are an internal service because all the departments pay fees into it based on their usage, and then we have it breaks even every year. We charge out the expenses. So printing services, for the first time you've seen its own separate fund here. And then on 351, messenger service. And printing services is our print shop, which is down in the basement of City Hall. Printed this document that we have here. And then the messenger service is our internal messenger services in the interdepartmental mail. And then also they do all of the outside mail for the city. And then the last two are on page 352 and 353. These are our insurance funds. On 352 is the risk management fund. This is where we track all of our property and liability insurance and our workers' comp programs. We charge fees to all of the departments based on their usage. Also, internal safety training is done through here. The balance is, we feel is pretty substantial, although property insurance rates have been going up fairly substantially in the last couple of years. And then 353 is the health insurance fund. This is where we're a self-insured fund for the health insurance for the city, and this is where all of the departments contribute into this fund, and then this is where all the insurance claims are administered through Blue Cross Blue Shield through here. And as you can see, we raised health insurance rates 7% this year, which we're planned that we're eating into the fund balance just a little bit in 22-23, but only $30,000, which we think we have a substantial balance to cover that. So we feel comfortable with that. We didn't want to raise the rates to the departments or the employees any higher than that. And that's the last fund. I don't know if anyone has any questions about any of them.
Just out of curiosity, and health insurance, do you purchase coverage for over a certain amount? I know it says we're self-insured since 2000. Was there a
Stop loss.
Yes, we have two stop losses. One is per incident type one. I think it's at $125,000. And then we have another one that's an aggregate, and they set that at 125% of expected claims. So we've never hit the aggregate. I think they never expect you will. But it's out there. But we have hit the other one, and we might have some stop loss recoveries here.
Yeah, I was just going to point out too, if you look in the 2021 actuals, we don't ever budget for it, but
There's a
in the
big
revenues,
year that year.
yeah, there's
it shows $900,000, almost
$896,000.
$900,000.
Right.
So that is actually during the year. There's actually that we received almost $900,000
Yes.
of reimbursement from an insurance company to reimburse us for the over the 125, is that right?
Yes, we pay the claims up front, then we get reimbursed back. That usually comes with higher premiums, and, I think you'd see that in the expenses.
So that's the other insurance
Yep.
/ fees? Is
Yeah.
that-
Yeah, it went from 952 up to, it's only up 4% this year, but it's inched up over the years.
Be a lot more if we weren't self-insured, wouldn't it?
Mhm.
It would be, yes.
Mhm.
Okay, we went through a lot. Want to call your attention to one other thing. There's a memo in the back of your packet. I wrote you back in December about the Ames intermodal facilities. For those of you who don't remember or new, that was a federally funded project. It actually went through Citywide, but we contracted out with the parking division at Iowa State University. Mark Miller does a great job on this. We pay him a fee and he manages it, the operations and also any capital improvements. What you need to know is the contract arrangement, we have partnership with Iowa State. If the revenue does not cover the expenditures for any one year, both the city and the university have to inject the money in to make it balance. Fortunately, under his, the first year it was a little short, 15,000 apiece, but I gave you the projection for 22, 23. We're actually going to have a surplus projected of 30-something thousand. More importantly, that we are built up a balance for capital improvements about $272,000. So we're slowly covering our operating costs. He's doing it, and plus building up a fund for any capital improvements. Now, the way they're doing it, it's predominantly we're renting those out, and again, we could probably take that new parking garage over there, rent out 100% of it for long-term rentals, but it won't be what we want. We want to create some open space turnover for the public. But this, I just want you to know, this is good news for us. Mark does a great job. We appreciate that. And there's a liability out there if he didn't, so. So we also include the packet. We didn't have as much in terms of written requests for budget changes, but you've got a couple in there, I think, right? You certainly got the budget, the town budget meeting input. I think we've given you everything we need to get you ready for next week, right? Do we leave out anything we haven't shown them?
No, I don't think so. I don't know if you want to talk about the schedule going forward a little bit. So,
Yeah, we can do the schedule. One thing I want to, it may not seem like it, but this is a finely balanced budget. But the council makes decisions on this. I would ask again, if you're contemplating making any motions to change something or add something or take something off, if you could contact me throughout the week so I can be prepared with Nancy and Dwayne, if we have to come up with extra money, where it would come from. I want to be able to react when you bring that up officially on February 8th, all right? Or cut something out. Okay, how about, Dwayne, you want to go over the schedules just so everybody
So
remembers the
Steve,
public?
just a question on the couple of the requests. One was more general, and one was more specific. When do you want to know if council wants that to be included in the budget? I'm
Well, no,
talking
you'll make the decision. Someone will make a motion or something, maybe on the,
Monday.
on 8th, a Tuesday. But we can check, how many do you have there? Two? I mean, one's from the,
about
do you have?
one's from Ames Main Street,
that's $70,000.
right?
And what's the other one?
Well, right, that's still might be out there too.
Okay, so we can be prepared for that. There may be some that you didn't get a question on or a request and you want to,
Oh,
council maybe change, that's what I'm saying.
it's something that's not been brought to council's attention.
Yeah, but I don't know what you call on your list, that's what I want to know. We got the museum, we have the Ames Main Street, any others that you remember you got letters on specifically?
I mean, more trees.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't, yeah. You'll have to talk to, when Keith comes
Yes,
up, because I think
yeah,
we
I would say,
have a,
That was the same memo with the 4-inch water main.
yes.
Mhm.
Right.
So we'll meet next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We have listed out on the schedule all the departments or actually programs that will come through and talk each of the evenings. We try to kind of even out the time, but every year somebody's got something that takes a little bit longer. So we'll just kind of be patient and get through make sure the council gets all the information they need to make their policy decisions. Then the following Tuesday, we'll do the wrap-up session. We'll go over public art, asset and coda, and your outside funding requests. Then based on your decisions that night, we need to take action to set a maximum levy. We've done that for the last few years. That's a new part of the Iowa Code. So we'll hold a hearing on that on February 22nd. Once you set that maximum levy hearing, you're essentially locked in. It's just what it says. It's maximum. You can't add anything after that. You could pull things off. And then at that evening, after we set the maximum levy, we'll set the hearing to adopt the budget on March the 8th. There'll also be some bond actions you'll need to take for a pre-levy hearing. And those have become fairly routine, but they'll be in your packets as we go forward through these meetings.
So when we leave here on the 8th, we want to make sure that's the budget you're willing to support and vote on and not make any changes past that. Unless there are deductions. I
Did
guess.
you, Dwayne, did you hand out a schedule? I'm trying to find it up here, or is that something that you just already have? We'll get a copy of it.
I don't know if did those go out through the clerk's office or?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't see it.
I probably got it earlier.
Nobody got it? We didn't send it
Did they
out?
get the schedule, Diane?
Yeah.
Huh?
We'll send
It's not
it.
a big
We'll send it out tonight.
What comes does that come?
You have it? You can send it
You know, we're here. I sent it
We
to
just
you.
know we'll be here.
I can send it to you. I can send it to you.
Can we
You want to
leave
send it out?
Yeah.
I'll send it to you.
Yes.
I'll send it out tonight.
Oh.
Page 14 of the
I
budget
think
book.
so, right?
Pardon me?
Isn't page 14 of the budget book,
yeah.
calendar for the,
Yeah, this is a little more specific.
Yeah, this will
Yeah.
provide
It
some
has like the
detail of
page
who's on what
numbers
night.
and who's on what night,
Everything on
yeah.
Fire and what, and what pages we're going to be on as we go through. I got it. Nancy sent it to me.
Yeah, I'll send
this
it to
just
you.
says the dates.
Brian, ask a question.
Oh, about the packets. He said we could leave them, or Diane said we could leave them.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other meetings.
Yeah, I just wanted.
You guys are dominating the room.
Yeah.
That's right.
Again, for the public, all this is on the finance website. You can see the budget itself, right? And
Yes.
the packets here.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're very fortunate in the city of Ames. We have a good financial status. We want to keep it. We appreciate you working with us. We are known for being a bit conservative, but I think that's holds us a good stead, I think, with our rating agencies and even the financial status of the community. But it allows us to do additional things you may want to do too. We have some room now. You understand, we created room for you, so that's good. And we need to thank all the department heads and Nancy and Dwayne who put this budget together. They did a lot of work. It's always an interesting puzzle to put it together. So you might see it now. They start in August, believe it or not.
I believe.
All right, thank you. We'll see you Tuesday.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Steve and Dwayne and Nancy. Great job. Moving on, disposition of communications to council. There's just one. This is one that Gloria, you brought up, and asked
Yeah.
about. So do you have any questions on this one, or just want us just take under advisement?
Which one
Well-
is this?
The
It's
climate
on,
act-
it's on the,
Which one?
should
Shut
be on
down?
your,
not locking us into carbon commitments with projects in the CIP.
I see.
It's the one that came from the Ames Climate Action Team.
it was emailed to everybody, and she just wanted to make sure it was brought to,
Yeah, and I'm not sure what to do with this, and I guess I talked to Steve briefly about having staff review what the projects are that are in the CIP and identify ones that they might want to go through an assessment process with later. But I don't know if that adds a second unnecessary layer or if it can just be done.
Well, I need clarification because one of the speakers last night was talking about even widening streets. So if you're getting to that level, there's a lot of projects that we call that. I understand we had a swimming pool, an indoor pool. So I don't know what's your definition.
So maybe we just need to sit on this and discuss
Yeah.
those projects.
I know what I want to do, and I've told you, we're trying to get the commitment with the budget we have on the indoor pool.
Mhm.
I think of other buildings, and we're certainly trying to convert as fast as we can right now to hybrids, and then eventually we'll go to electric vehicles.
Mhm.
The cars are easy. It's getting up, we're going to have our first pickup truck. It's going to be a hybrid, and as the market allows it, we'll buy those electric vehicles too. But I'm not sure, I don't know if you want me to get into stop signs. I mean, people would argue stopping cars is not sustainable and widening streets, putting turning lanes. I don't think you want that, but you may want that. I don't know. No parking lots, no parking ramps. I don't know.
Well, I wonder if this is just something that council can be aware of, and as we go through next week, all the different conversations, if something's, comes to light, you can just ask that question and
Or certainly if you see a specific project in the
Yeah.
CIP you think fits it, you can give me a clue what you're thinking. I just want to be on the same wavelength of the policy of what you mean by those.
Yeah, my main concern is I think it's an issue that we should be considering, and I don't know where that fits in the process. Is it something we have to highlight now with some sort of motion, or is it just something that we can take under advisement and leave till later? I'm happy to do that too, so.
do you have a motion? If not, if there's no motion, I was just going to presume that council will take this under advisement, pose the questions while we're going, if you have questions on some of the projects, and go from there versus having or asking staff to go through and do an exhaustive analysis on all these. I mean, to me, it's like, okay, if there's a major power plant project, it's a good question to ask. If there's a major resource recovery project, if we start getting into the minutia, it might get to be the point where it's like, it's almost a lot of work for staff for
Mhm.
minimal response, but I think it's good to have it in front of us to be aware of, so. All right. Council comments. Brahman, anything tonight?
Nope, nothing for me.
How about you, Amber?
No.
Lita?
Nothing.
Yeah.
So the quick thing, to your point, Steve, about the position of the city, when I think about that list of cities that are already at the 810 limit, their conversations about how the rollback affects them is a very different conversation.
Mhm.
So, guys, the work that you've done in years past to position our city in such good position as we face this change in the rollback, this is where it pays off. And so, you just need to hear the phrase, thank you for your hard work, because now we're positioned. I don't know how those other cities are going to deal with that. They're going to have very different conversations than we are. So thank you.
Thank you.
Gloria?
Tim stole my comment, although it wasn't verbatim, but I was going to say initially, or that same thing. So thank you very much for your hard work and excellence.
Yes.
All right. Very good. Well, entertain motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.